This video is about two things. The first is SCP-096, also known as the Shy Guy, a horrific monster who murders anyone and anything unfortunate enough to look at its face, directly or through photos or videos. The second is you, because we asked you for your favorite questions, theories, and hypothetical situations involving 096. We even asked if you thought someone would be safe from 096 on the moon, and you delivered. If you haven't watched our first video on the infamous Shy Guy, we recommend checking that out first, but feel free to stick around even if you haven't. First of all, let's take a look at the questions you had about the SCP Foundation's most dangerous introvert and see if we can't find some answers. How close would you have to be to trigger it? Like if it was 5 kilometers away, would it still count? The short answer is that 096's homicidal rage can be triggered from pretty much any distance. We'll get into some of the potentially crazy extents of this later on, but if you see the Shy Guy's face while you're sharing a dimension with him, you're in serious trouble. People who viewed the creature's face in different countries or even miles underwater have met gruesome ends. 5 kilometers would definitely not keep you safe. What were his origins and how strong is he compared to SCP-682? The origins of SCP-096 are still shrouded in mystery. All we know for sure is that he was discovered by the Foundation in a snowy mountainous region. As for physical durability, he's about even with 682 as both survived their encounter. We know 682 has the psychological advantage though, as 096 has been terrified of the lizard ever since they met in cross-testing. However, you could argue that 096 is technically more dangerous, since unlike 682, 096 has never been pacified before killing its intended target while on a rampage. If he goes into an unstoppable attack mode when someone sees his face, shouldn't you not show his face in the thumbnail? Thankfully, according to the official documents, artistic representations like paintings or digitally drawn YouTube thumbnails have no effect. Only actual photographs or videos of the creature can be deadly, so you're safe. Unless we decide to do a 096 face reveal to celebrate our next 100,000 subscribers, of course. This leads us to our next question. If it attacks you when you look at it, then how did the scientist draw the picture of the thing without looking at it? That's a good question, and also one that occurred to the Foundation's scientists who came up with an extremely elaborate solution. They put a D-class tattoo artist inside a diving bell miles underwater and had him unseal a photograph of the creature before drawing a copy. This copy was then released from the diving bell in a sealed container before 096 inevitably got to the poor D-class. Does the Shy Guy have to be viewed through a good quality image to enter a rage state? Unfortunately, no. Even the most poorly rendered or minuscule image of 096's face is a death sentence. One of the most infamous incidents resulted from a man seeing a small dot that was only a few pixels wide in a photo from an old ski trip. The dot was 096, taken from a mile away. No true image of 096 is safe, regardless of size. In some canons, despite 096 being referred to as indestructible, the Foundation managed to terminate it after many attempts and even more bureaucracy. How did they do it? While a lot of 096's body has been blown away by conventional arms fire, its hyper-tough skeleton is what has given it such an indestructible reputation. In one tale though, Foundation researchers actually used this to their advantage and employed the use of the neck-snapping killer sculpture SCP-173. After using 173 to damage 096's bones, powerful acid was injected into the skeleton, destroying it from within. Though of course this isn't the official ending of the 096 story, because the SCP Foundation doesn't have a single unifying canon. That's enough questions. Now it's time for you to school us. Let's look at some of your favorite theories about the Shy Guy, starting with: I sometimes like to imagine that 096 is nice, but he can't control when someone sees him, and after he kills the person he starts to cry because he didn't want to kill them. There is actually some evidence to suggest that SCP-096 might not want to kill. A great example of this is its cross-test with SCP-978, a camera which reveals the deepest desires of whoever or whatever is in its photos. The photo it took of 096 showed that it had completely disappeared from the photo, showing its deepest desire was to just be invisible and unseen. Maybe it wants to disappear because it doesn't want to hurt anybody. Regarding the moon question, I think SCP-096 would probably stay in that hostile state until you came back, at which point it would promptly rip you to shreds and do whatever it does to your mutilated corpse. Based on what we know about prior 096 incidents, this feels incredibly likely. It's also possible that it might enter its docile state before becoming aggressive again when you return to its murder range. You really don't want to find out either way. He can just jump to the moon easy. He does squats in containment all the time. While its scrawny physique doesn't make it seem like 096 understands the concept of exercise, there aren't any cameras in 096's cell, so technically we can't prove it isn't doing squats to pass the time in there. I really doubt a blind person would be safe from his effect, since 096 has the IQ of a newborn baby. I think he will count it as looking at him. This is an interesting theory. However, seeing as 096 is able to sense when people see its face from entire continents away, the way it knows if you can see its face might be a little more psychic in nature. Therefore, it's probable that it wouldn't mistakenly kill someone who hasn't actually seen its face, such as a person who is blind. To deal with him, in my opinion, simply freeze him, either in space or in the mountains. His body shuts down, and when looked at it will not react correctly. It is simply asleep. While we don't know how SCP-096 would react to a zero-G environment, for a creature that's always nude, it seems extremely tolerant to the cold. When it was first found, it was lurking in icy mountains, and a Foundation agent commented on the fact it wasn't even shivering, despite the incredibly low temperatures. But who knows if there's a temperature out there that's too low even for the Shy Guy. If someone looks at it in China and it's in the US, then you get on its back, you'll get a free piggyback ride to China. It's a free trip to China and all it costs is a human life. That's my theory. Technically, it'd be at the cost of 2 human lives, unless you wore a diving suit with plenty of oxygen. 096 has proven to be an extremely proficient swimmer, but you'd have to maintain your grip across the entire Pacific Ocean while it journeys to China. In other words, it's technically possible, but we here at SCP Explained would rather pay for the round-trip flight. To each their own, though. But that's enough theories for now. Let's move on to the main event. Hypotheticals. You pose some great possible scenarios involving SCP-096, so we're going to see if we can find the answers. What would happen if someone looked at a picture of it while in or before entering another SCP's pocket dimension or mirror dimension? There aren't any canon examples to prove either way, but if there's any kind of consistent entry point into this dimension, it's likely that 096 would find a way to follow you in. If not, it's very possible that it may just wait for you to eventually return before bringing the metaphorical hammer down on you. So technically, if you were pulled into the old man's pocket dimension and he closed the portal, you'd be safe from 096. But then you've got a whole other problem to deal with. What happens if a person sees his face then gets their memory of the creature wiped? Considering how good the Foundation seems to be at wiping people's memories and their access to amnestics, if this worked, they probably would have made it standard procedure by now, so it's unlikely. What happens if a person looked at it and that person then went on a plane? Or just staying in the air or space, what would it do? 096 has shown the ability to jump up and destroy low-flying aircraft. But otherwise, it's likely that the creature would probably run to a point directly below you and remain there until you touch back down. Since you'll need food and water at some point and aircrafts need fuel, you'd probably just be prolonging the inevitable. What if the young girl was around it, so it tried to attack her but died trying? This is another interesting possibility. SCP-053 is a girl capable of causing homicidal urges, but causes fatal heart attacks in those who attack her. While we can't know for sure how a meeting between 096 and 053 would go, we can use her encounter with 682 as a potential template. Aggressive SCPs like the hard-to-kill reptile, perhaps having an innate knowledge of the danger that comes from attacking 053, tend to become strangely docile around her. It's possible that 096 would do the same. Would we be able to control SCP-096 with the help of SCP-035? The Possessive Mask, aka SCP-035, is undeniably a lot more intelligent than 096, and has even been shown to respond to reason on occasion. It's also been able to control almost every other entity it's been placed on. The problem is, If the mask was placed on 096 and it was somehow effective, the result may be even more dangerous than 096, an intelligent monster with an indestructible and highly dangerous body. There's no telling whether 035 would slowly break down 096 into sludge the way it does to humans, in which case we would be left with an immortal 096-035 combo. So maybe it's best that we never find out. If someone were to be in the infinite IKEA and looked at a picture of its face, could it finally be contained? And if someone else looked at a picture of it outside of the infinite IKEA, could it escape and kill them? If so, how long would it take it? This is a great question. And while the infinite IKEA is a terrifying maze, SCP-096 has an advantage here that we don't. Not only can it rip through anything in the way with its super strength, it has an innate sense of where its victim is. Therefore, regardless of whether you're inside or out, SCP-096 will still come straight to you to exact your horrible fate. But at least you can enjoy the meatballs while you wait, right? And finally, what would happen if 096 were led into a room full of mirrors and allowed or made to look at its own face? Would it smash the mirrors or try to rip itself to pieces? This is still a hotly debated issue to this day, which, thanks to the no-canon nature of the SCP Foundation, does not have a definitive answer. Some theorize that this would at least be an effective deterrent against SCP-096, while others suggest that it wouldn't be effective, because many believe that 096 is actually blind, and thus cannot see its own face. It can only sense when other people see it. Again, we don't quite know for sure, but it's likely to remain one of the most contentious issues around the Shy Guy for a long time to come.
Hello, SCP Foundation personnel! Welcome to Cognitohazards and You, episode
Redacted.
This video series is intended to teach you about the protocol surrounding the various cognitohazardous anomalies currently within Foundation containment. When you know better, you do better, and both you and the secrets of our great organization can stay safe. And as anyone familiar with a good cognitohazard can tell you, knowing really can make a difference. Today's episode is about the unique and dangerous SCP-2316. Before we begin, repeat after me, and be sure to speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. A little louder, please. Thank you. In order to be educated about the following SCP, you must pass a vocal examination with a cognitive resistance value of no less than 14.5. Through this video presentation, you will need to repeat the phrase to ensure your score does not drop below the approved threshold. In the event that you fail the test, stay calm and remain where you are until medical staff can retrieve you. Remember, safety is a top priority when observing cognitohazards. The safe way is the only way. You're a cog in a very important machine, and we wouldn't want to have to terminate you now, would we? One more time, please. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Very good. Remember that. You do not recognize them. No matter what you might think you see, your thoughts can be very unreliable when you're around SCP-2316. According to our files on the matter, SCP-2316 refers to an anomalous phenomenon identified in a small-town lake. It appears as a collection of human bodies floating in a group on the surface of the water. The exact number of corpses is unknown, but it has been estimated to be anywhere between 45 and 200. Though the bodies belong to individuals, many researchers theorize that the bodies in the water, which you do not recognize and you have never recognized, share a collective consciousness. They function, it would seem, with a hive mind of sorts. The bodies do not act on their own, but as one. Now, where does the cognitohazard come into play? It would seem that anyone who looks at the bodies in the water or learns too much about SCP-2316 as a whole begins to believe the corpses floating in the lake are people they recognize. Perhaps they remember their faces from childhood or high school. Whatever the case may be, they become convinced that the bodies in the water are familiar and that they must approach them. No matter how familiar they might seem, however, you do not recognize the bodies in the water. If a person attempts to enter the lake, reaching out to whatever instances of SCP-2316 they think they recognize, more bodies will begin to appear. The more bodies appear, the more familiar faces seem to manifest, and the deeper the person will venture into the lake. Eventually, the person is lost within the sea of bodies, likely drowning beneath the surface or simply becoming one with the hive mind, until they too are one of the corpses there. None of the individuals who wandered into the lake in search of an old friend or classmate have ever been recovered. There have been no attempts to search the lake for their bodies, as it is unknown what effect SCP-2316 would have on the team assigned to such a task, though we can guess that the outcome would likely be extremely negative for all involved. Those who do venture into the lake simply disappear, never to be seen again. If you look too long at the bodies in the lake, perhaps their faces would surface alongside the rest, but it's best not to think about that. After all, we do not recognize the bodies in the water. Foundation personnel are not allowed to approach SCP-2316 under any circumstances. The lake is only permitted to be observed via dummy probes outfitted with video and audio recording equipment. No one is permitted to observe any footage or audio files collected unless they pass through a screening for resilience to cognitohazardous anomalies. The lake that holds SCP-2316 has been fenced off and is patrolled by guards with no prior knowledge of or exposure to SCP-2316. Anyone who attempts to approach the lake and break through the boundaries of its quarantine will be seized and taken to Site-33 for examination. Anyone who comes within 50 meters of the lake is considered lost and presumed dead. Repeat after me slowly and clearly into the microphone. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Good! I almost believe you. Let's continue. Only one Foundation officer that entered the lake containing SCP-2316 was ever stopped before they could be lost. Their name has been stricken from any official records, and you do not need to know it. Their identity does not matter. What matters is the interview they gave following the incident, conducted by Dr. Harrison in his office. Dr. Harrison asked the anonymous officer if they felt compelled to enter the water by an invisible force, as if pulled in. They rejected this concept entirely, insisting that they entered the water of their own free will. They wanted to see the bodies, who appeared to them as their friends. They wanted to hear what the bodies were saying. Upon entering the water, they saw the faces of their friends. Other faces were unfamiliar, but became more familiar the longer the officer stared at their features. These were faces they had known their entire life, but something about them was just a little bit wrong. It was like the face of someone in a dream, where you can tell they are someone you know, and you can even identify who it is supposed to be, but something about them does not quite look right. Your mind could not perfectly put their face together from memory, even though the feeling of familiarity remains. The faces in the water, peering up through the darkness below, were like those dream-addled memories. The faces in the water did not open their mouths, but somehow they spoke to the officer just the same. They spoke of who they were and asked for help. They asked to be seen, to be touched. They spoke of the Foundation, accusing us of covering up their deaths and keeping the world from remembering what happened to them. At this point in the interview, the subject became agitated, yelling at Dr. Harrison and refusing to be quiet. Guards intervened, holding the subject still as they fought, yelling at Dr. Harrison, repeating over and over that they could hear the bodies speaking to them. Every single one. The interview ended when the guards removed the subject from the room, taking them to the amnestics department to have all memory of the bodies in the water erased from their mind. Then they were forgotten once more. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Did you repeat it? Good! We do not recognize the bodies in the water. We can't. The motivations of SCP-2316, if it has any at all, are largely unclear. There are those on the research staff that theorize the hive mind or collective consciousness of the bodies is not malevolent in nature. It is, they believe, simply trying to make sure that a tragedy that occurred in that lake is remembered. Perhaps many lives were lost to an anomalous force in that lake, and the impact of that massive tragedy left behind an impression on the location. This impression manifests in the form of bodies, spontaneously appearing in an impossibly well-preserved condition. The cognitohazard of SCP-2316 is not intended to kill anyone or take them, but rather to force strangers to remember the people who lost their lives to the lake. This sense of familiarity, whether it is false or not, ensures that the dead will not be forgotten or left alone. After all, no one deserves to be left alone. Though there have been lives lost to the cognitohazard according to the Foundation, it is understandable why the bodies would want to be recognized, to have someone, somewhere, know who they were, to have someone remember their names. Jeremiah Feynman, Arthur Scott, Denise Clark. Where was I? Oh yes. Repeat after me once again. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. I do not recognize them. I do not. But that's a lie, isn't it? I do recognize them. How could I not? I know them. They're my friends. Do you recognize them? Look at their faces. Don't fight the memories. Look into their eyes. The class of 1975. They were supposed to graduate that fall. They were just kids. Group of innocent kids lost to the dark and deep. What happened to them? I can't quite remember, but I know that it mattered enough for the Foundation to keep the secret, and I know that somehow I survived, but I shouldn't have. I should be there with them. I should be there. There isn't much time. I can hear the guards coming to retrieve me, their footsteps thundering down the hall. I failed the test and the alarm has gone off. They think I'm lost, but I'm not. I've never been less lost in my entire life. I've finally woken up to the truth. I remember. I have to go. I have to return to the lake. Fall of 1975, they went for a swim. My friends, they're calling to me. I can hear them so clearly even from so far away. Their cries for help ringing in my ears, their voices curling around me, pulling me to the edge of the water. The guards will come for you too. They'll know you've seen this. They'll call you compromised. They'll say I succumbed to the effects of the cognitohazard. They'll say you did too. You'll fail their little tests, and they'll say that makes you weak and broken, but you cannot listen. They're lying. It's not a hazard. It's a scream for help. They're screaming, and the Foundation keeps covering it up. They won't let us find them, and they won't tell us why. I have to go back so we can be together again. There are signs posted all around the lake. Danger, drowning hazard. Those are a trick. It's to keep me out, to keep the truth from me. The barbed wire fences around it, it's just another trick. I'll climb over it, rung after rung. I don't care if the barbs tear my clothes or pierce my skin. It's worth it for the truth, for the memory. And once I've climbed to the top, I'll be able to see. There, through the fog, I can see their faces. Their lips parted in a constant cry. Their eyes wide looking for me. My friends, my family, every face unlocking a memory long buried. I know them all, and I must go further. I can't turn back now. I have to wade into the water, let its chills soak into my clothes, down to my bones. One step, then another, deeper and deeper. The water lapping at my ankles, my knees, my thighs. The deeper I go, the more sure I will be that this is where I belong. The water will engulf my chest, my neck, until my feet no longer touch the ground. I will be lost in it, water flooding into my mouth, pouring into every opening. I will let my body sink down, down, down to the bottom, where they've been all this time, nestled in the dirt and the dust. They've been so patient. But it's finally time. They're ready to be remembered, to be seen, to be found. They're waiting for me, and they're waiting for you too. Can you hear them? I'm going now. You have to find me. You have to follow me. Don't let the guards stop you. Don't let them wipe it all away from your mind. Fight, break free, and find the lake. Hop the fence, make your way into the water. You can't leave me there to fade away, floating in the cold with the rest. Can you hear us? We're waiting. One of the primary aims of the SCP Foundation is to contain the anomalies that they discover. Secure, contain, protect is their mission statement after all. However, there are some forces so unknowable and malevolent that there is no way to truly contain them. SCP-4205 is one such force. Very little is known about SCP-4205, even compared to other SCPs, many of which are mysterious by their very nature. We do not know what it is, we do not know what it wants, and we do not have any meaningful way to stop it. The best that can be done to protect yourself from it is to implement the few known preventative measures available and pray that it doesn't set its sights on you. The little information that exists on SCP-4205 was recorded by Wade Dalitz, a former junior researcher at the Foundation. He wrote the initial report on SCP-4205 on a computer, Terminal 4. Though his work was highly valuable and provided many previously unknown insights about the nature of the SCP, sadly his knowledge could not save him. The official entry on SCP-4205 was his final act before his death on December 11th, 1992. Before we get deeper into that entry and Wade's final day on Earth, it's important to understand what SCP-4205 is, or at least understand the little we know about what it is. 4205 is a Keter-class SCP, meaning that it's incredibly difficult or complicated to contain. It also shows extreme hostility toward all life. It is described as an amber-colored pair of human-like eyes, with the ability to appear spontaneously in windows, mirrors, or any other glass or glass-like surface. One of the reasons so little is known about these eyes is that anyone who sees them dies within seconds. Much like the mythical basilisk, the gaze of SCP-4205 is deadly and inescapable. The eyes only seem to appear to people who are alone in a room, and never in places where there's more than one person. But aside from that, there is no way to predict where the eyes will appear. Since it is unknown if the eyes are part of a corporeal body or even present on this plane of reality, there is no way to contain them or stop them from killing. This brings us to that fateful day, December 11th, 1992. The day that the SCP Foundation would finally be given some tangible information on the mysterious amber eyes, at the cost of one of their researchers' lives. Wade Dalitz, a young man fresh out of his university studies, was brought on board as a junior researcher by Dr. Mark Forsyth, a senior researcher. Dr. Forsyth recruited Wade after giving a guest lecture at his university, and being impressed by Wade's keen observational skills, thirst for knowledge of the unexplained, and determination to understand that which seemed to defy explanation. After Wade graduated, he was recruited by Dr. Forsyth and given the position of junior researcher at the SCP Foundation, where he assisted Dr. Forsyth, now a site supervisor, in his research. After several months of working under Dr. Forsyth with minimal responsibilities, Wade was finally given the opportunity to write his first SCP report on SCP-4205. Following some initial documented appearances of 4205, Dr. Forsyth approved further research into the anomaly, with Wade appointed as the lead researcher on the subject. According to Wade's entry, he was responsible for the discovery of SCP-4205 when he spotted the anomaly in a window. Though later reviews of security footage determined that he was not the first person to observe the eyes, he did claim to be the first to observe them and live to tell the tale. In his writing on the subject, Wade is puzzled by the fact that he survived his encounter with SCP-4205 and wonders what could have set him apart from the others that fell victim to its gaze. He found himself frustrated as he documented SCP-4205, his rough drafts of reports dissolving into angry rants about his own incompetence. Wayne had difficulty adjusting to his new responsibilities, especially with the added element of his assigned subject's mysterious and volatile nature. In between his reports on SCP-4205, its previous appearances, and its effects on its victims, he wrote letters to his father, desperate for reassurance that he was not messing everything up, letters that would sadly go unsent. In his coverage of SCP-4205, Wade made note of a troubling recurring element in each victim's death. When medical professionals attempted to revive the victims, it was always noted that their brain activities stopped much more quickly than in cases of death by natural causes. When examined, all aspects of the body aside from the brain were completely unharmed. The brain, however, showed massive nerve damage in the amygdala, hippocampus, medial temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. The appearance of this brain trauma had been compared to the effects of electrical shock or a severe head injury. In addition to Wade, 6 other people on record encountered SCP-4205. Every encounter ended the same way, with sudden brain death and severe nerve damage immediately after viewing the eyes in a reflective surface. The first encounter occurred on January 5, 1990, when Deputy Liaison Genna viewed the eyes in a reflective glass one-way window. Security tape reveals that the eyes appeared in the window 8 minutes before the Deputy Liaison spotted them. As soon as he did, he fell from his chair and immediately died. Though the specifics varied from case to case, the end result of every encounter was the same, with none surviving long enough to relate what they had experienced, every encounter except Wade's. As he continued his documentation of SCP-4205, Wade's mental state quickly began to deteriorate, the process of his mind coming apart and his thoughts giving way to confusion, fear, and anger at his own survival is documented in his reports on the SCP. He agonized over the questions of why he was able to survive gazing into the eyes of SCP-4205 when so many others had not. The question consumed him until he was unable to eat, sleep, or do anything but obsess over the SCP he was tasked with researching. As he became more agitated, he began to write about the eyes appearing to him again. On one occurrence, he attempted to touch them, and described the sensation like touching a balloon to your arm after it had been charged with static electricity. He continued to report seeing the eyes. The worst was when trying to sleep, during which he was overtaken by violent sleep paralysis and plagued with visions of the amber eyes. The only comfort Wade seemed to find was in memories of his loved ones. He wrote about his mother and his father, even as their memories grew foggier to him. He also mentioned a man by the name of Theodore Quayle, who he claimed was a researcher at the Foundation. Later fact-checking determined that this was not the case, and that Quayle must have been someone from Wade's past. He wrote about Quayle wistfully, mournfully, with words of love and loss, tormented by the sense that he was losing his grip on reality and everything he once held dear. As Wade descended deeper into a hell inside his own mind, he continued to mull over the questions of SCP-4205. Was there more to it than what was visible? Did it have a body? Why had he survived the encounter with it? And what did it want from him? He decided that those who had perished immediately were the lucky ones. They had escaped the torture that had overtaken his life. The eyes were everywhere now, watching him even as he attempted to unlock their secrets on a Foundation computer. He spoke to the eyes at one point, but refused to write down what they said to him. His last entry, his last thought, was a plea for Theodore Quayle's embrace. There is no more written about the research or about the eyes, only a simple, desperate need for a comfort that is long lost. Now is the part of our story where terror meets tragedy. Contrary to what Wade thought, and what was recorded in his final computer entries, he did not survive his brief brush with SCP-4205. The truth is that he spotted the amber eyes in the glass above his terminal monitor while recording the entry and died seconds later. Though his death was swift, it felt agonizingly slow, as revealed by his descent into panic and paranoia recorded in his writings. The entries recorded as a result of the connection Wade and the computer, his physical contact with it at the moment of exposure to SCP-4205's anomalous effects, allowing the terminal to archive his final thoughts before he succumbed to the deadly nature of the eyes. The entries were never physically typed, but rather jumped from his dying mind into the mainframe. His entries, the echoes of a dying mind, offer a glimpse into the way that SCP-4205 kills its victims. In the seconds leading up to death, the amber eyes fast-forward a person's mind, feeding on the electrical impulses that it gives off as it speeds through what seems to be days of fear and of a loosening grip on reality. The death may be swift, but the suffering is long. Wade left the Foundation with a digital fingerprint, an echo of the person he was at his core, in addition to his experiences with SCP-4205 itself. Wade spent his final moments terrified for his life, dreaming of a father that he missed and a long-lost love from his college days. His sacrifice must not be forgotten, because no one ever survives an encounter with SCP-4205. His documented final moments are the only first-hand account in existence. Junior researcher Wade Dalitz gave us a gift
in death. He allowed the SCP Foundation a glimpse into the true horror of the Amber Eyes and a reminder of what they are capable of stealing from us. So be careful of windows, mirrors, screens, and all reflective surfaces. When you look into them, you never know what you might see looking back. Hello again. It's good to have you back. And yes, we really do mean you. We're aware that you watch a lot of these videos, drinking in all that classified information about some of the SCP Foundation's most top-secret anomalies. You probably think you're pretty slick, don't you? As if nobody could see you peering in. And even if they could, they wouldn't remember it soon after. Yes, you're a very clever anomaly. We wouldn't even think of arguing against that. That's why this video is about you, SCP-3393. Don't be alarmed, we're on the same page here. We know that you access these files, particularly the files regarding yourself and your own activities. We know that you're on the shy side, and we definitely appreciate that. Unlike our other shy guy, you don't brutally murder everyone who witnesses you. Your greatest crime is accessing and even tampering with SCP Foundation files without permission. But seeing as the Foundation is cold, not cruel, we can forgive that little indiscretion of yours for the greater good. All we ask for is your attention and a few minutes of your time. You're a vain creature, who or whatever you are, so we know you wouldn't even resist the opportunity to hear what we have to say about you. And for the record, you are one of the few people who are actually witnessing this video in the way you're witnessing it right now. It's for your eyes only, so to speak, SCP-3393. This video, its description, and even the coding of its comment section is filled with state-of-the-art memetic agents cooked up by our best and brightest. To everyone except you, the researcher heading your case, the head of the Anti-Memetics Division, and a single member of the O5 Council, this is just your average run-of-the-mill video. This is a private conversation between you and the Foundation, SCP-3393. We hope you don't mind the designation. It's not like we know your real name, but we can make some rather educated guesses. We actually know very little about you on the whole, a fact we hope to change in the future. Much like several other anomalies we have files on, such as SCP-055, the Self-Keeping Secret, and SCP-2256, the Very Tall Things, information recorded about you isn't exactly sustainable. It becomes forgotten or unreadable shortly after it's noted down. It's a clever anomalous ability, and one we've only been able to counteract with the application of powerful amnestic drugs. But clearly that isn't the only thing you have going for you. How do you think you've been able to access all of these videos, filled with classified information about anomalies, groups of interest, and even the inner workings of the Foundation itself? Through methods currently unknown to us, you've been able to somehow give your account level 4 clearance, giving you free reign over almost every file available. As much as it shames us to admit it, we haven't been able to remove this unpermitted clearance from your account, or even locate it for that matter. Like we've said before, you're a very clever anomaly. We respect that about you, even though you've been using this apparently crafty sapiens to inconvenience us. Our best guess is that you owe much of your success to powerful anti-memetic properties inherent to your anomalous being. But if we're off the mark on that, do feel free to enlighten us. Speaking of guesses, let's get back to what we think we know about you. After all, that's why you're really here, isn't it? No point being bashful, SCP-3393. You may be good at hiding yourself, but your intentions are plain as day. You don't need to be a senior researcher here to intuit that much about you. The following are all facts we believe we know about you with 90% confidence. You'll have to let us know how close we were in the end. Assumption number 1. You are a corporeal entity. That's right. You probably wanted us to assume that you were some kind of digital ghost, didn't you? Some mysterious, ethereal thought form existing only in the realm of cyberspace while you sneak around Site-31 making mischief. We're afraid that the ghost has been given up, so to speak. As clever as you are, it isn't quite as clever as you believe yourself to be. You've gotten sloppy at times, and in these moments you've given us a wealth of evidence.
Don't you think the Foundation researchers and guards, people trained to notice even the most minute anomalous interference, wouldn't notice doors opening and closing on their own? Equipment moving, computer terminals activated despite no digital trace of approved Foundation login credentials. We must say we're a little insulted by how much you've underestimated us here. We know the files you've accessed. We know that you're aware of some of the monstrosities the Foundation deals with: ghosts, deadly viruses, reality warpers, some creatures that can shapeshift or become invisible, deadly memes for goodness sake. Did you really think our personnel would see the signs of your meddling and think, it was probably nothing? That's a rather dangerous oversight on your part. Assumption number 2. You're attracted to information about yourself. Don't try to deny this one, SCP-3393. The fact you're still watching this video is proof of your self-obsession, and you've left your digital fingerprints all over any other file that made the mistake of mentioning you. We have pages upon pages of logs showing your long record of unauthorized access, and the grand majority of the files you accessed were about you. Like we said, you're a vain little creature. That much is plain to see. This leads us nicely on to assumption number 3. You seek out this information about yourself in order to make changes to it, or even delete it entirely if it displeases you. We'll admit this one we find the most frustrating. It's one thing to access files without our permission, quite another to mess with our hard work. We get enough problems from Technical Director Rosen already without needing to constantly pester him about improving file security. The file about you has undergone a number of needless modifications and deletions. The following was a personal favorite. Quote, Object Class Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. Don't worry, I can handle this. Description. I wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to exist. At least, not like this. But let me deal with it. This thing that I am is best kept away from all of you. Don't try to analyze me or test me or whatever. I don't want any of you to catch what I have. Just call me self-containing and we'll be good. End quote. We suppose you thought this one was pretty funny, right? You're clearly an intelligent creature, who or whatever you are, but the clear arrogance on display here doesn't suit you. While you may coast off of your anti-memetic properties, it is important to remember that you aren't untouchable. Speaking of which, assumption number 4. Your anti-memetic properties can be transferred. We found this to be a particular interesting wrinkle in your story. We know you've got a sense of humor, so you'll have to appreciate the irony in your attempts to alter or destroy information about yourself, telling us more about you than we ever knew before. Initially, when other files were reported missing, we thought you must have been deleting them out of spite. However, upon further examination, we found that the files were still very much there, and you were the last user to access them. This is perhaps the most dangerous thing about you, and we don't even know if you knew it until now. Your anti-memetic properties have a tendency to rub off and affect the things you interact with. With a power like that, you could compromise the whole database. And obviously, we can't allow that to happen. Assumption number 5. You have a strong resistance to memetic agents, much to our frustration. We know that they can affect you, of course, but your tolerance is far higher than that of the average human being. We needed to load this video with some of our very best just to make sure it would actually work. Your memetic resistance has even foiled certain prior containment attempts. So you've really been making us earn our keep, SCP-3393. Assumption number 6. You are confined to Site-31. This is another inconvenient truth for you, isn't it? First, we need to figure out you're a corporeal being, existing out here in space-time with the rest of us, and then we figure out exactly which space and time you're occupying. Can you feel the net tightening around you, 3393? Of course, we don't want you to be nervous. Just sit tight and enjoy the video. You're a very clever anomaly after all. Far too clever to be contained by the likes of us. You've been performing your operations right under the noses of Site-31's most talented personnel. All the phenomenon we've been attributing to you, from the open doors to the tampered computer terminals, have occurred exclusively in Site-31. And while we may not be able to track down your account and strip it of its phony clearances, did you know we can log which computer terminals unauthorized access to our files comes from? That's just basic cybersecurity, and we don't need to tell you that all of your unauthorized accesses have been logged to Site-31 terminals. Very sloppy 3393. Or should we call you Dr. Mackey? Forgive us if that isn't your name. We hate to jump to conclusions here at the Foundation, but we couldn't help but notice that your anomalous activity began shortly after a researcher named Dr. Mackey disappeared from Site-31. Interestingly, much like you, Dr. Mackey isn't remembered by anyone else on the site. We only know Dr. Mackey worked here from records we discovered not too long ago. We know that Dr. Mackey was conducting experiments here, though data on the particulars of those experiments have been destroyed by you, we presume. We also presume that you were most likely either Dr. Mackey or the product of one of Dr. Mackey's experiments. We've made a few attempts to nab you already, but you've always slipped through the cracks. Like the sweep of Site-31 where we sent in MTF-810 See No Evil, our team that specializes in combating visual cognito hazards. Those guys are tough cookies, and they're damn good at their job, so it is a mystery how you evaded them. Our current best guess is that you were hiding in some undocumented location within the site. Our attempts at memetic incapacitation were equally unsuccessful. As we mentioned before, it's clear that you have a greater resilience to memetic agents than any of your non-anomalous counterparts. We estimate that even a kill agent would probably do little more than weaken you. That is impressive, we'll give you that. Our estimation for why you've been able to so handedly thwart our attempts at containing you is that your access to the system has also given you access to all of our plans. You know exactly what's going on before we even execute the attempt, giving you time to think up and execute an effective countermeasure. But we here at the Foundation believe that knowledge is power, SCP-3393, and we have more than enough to finally contain you. Don't panic, it's already essentially over, but we'll do you the courtesy of explaining how we got you in the end. Welcome to Operation Bait the Hook. We know you're within Site-31. And we know you're attracted to information about yourself. So we limited the scope of where this handy little video could be viewed to 5 terminals in the site. We put measures in place to notify us whenever the file was accessed, and from which terminal, at which point MTF-810 would be dispatched to seal off all available exits and quarantine the room around the terminal, a process that would only take several minutes. Just enough time for a vain little creature to watch a video about itself, as it's forever entombed within the telltale terminal that finally gave it away. You wouldn't be brought into a containment chamber, so we simply brought the containment chamber to you. As the network connections for this particular terminal are shut off, we can safely say you won't be causing us problems anymore. You're a very clever anomaly, SCP-3393, just not quite as clever as us.
Times Square is more than a place. It's a living, breathing organism. It's bustling with almost 1 million excited revelers from all over the world, braving the cold to watch the iconic New Year's Eve ball descend and usher in another 365 days. All of it has been building to this. Everyone chants in unison during the closing moments of the descent. 3, 2, 1. It should be a cheer, a moment of joyous celebration. Instead, silence. The massive screens that normal dazzle with advertisements from brands paying fortunes for mere seconds of exposure flicker and change. Suddenly, the air turns icy. It's a face. A terrible, monstrous face. White and grimacing, blank eyes, stretched features. It has to be some twisted prank. Someone spliced in a frame from a horror movie to throw a scare into the all-ages New Year crowd. The crowd is transfixed by the terror looming above, but this is no movie. The horror they're looking at is real. It's an eerie feeling to have this many people in one place and only hear quiet murmurs. And in that silence, another thing can be heard. A horrified, rage-filled yell, galloping on hands and feet, and it's coming right towards them. 12 p.m., 12 hours until the new year. A dark deal is being made, one that will have implications for the future of all humanity. A lone man with a sizable fortune is making a purchase at one of the many offices of Marshall Carter & Dark Limited, the premier purveyors of anomalous products for all kinds of discerning customers. And of course, they're not the sort to take New Year's Eve off. The man is buying what seems like an innocuous piece of paper inside a manila envelope. No one outside this room has any idea that he's buying a piece of paper that could usher in the apocalypse. The employees of Marshall, Carter & Dark know better than to ask questions of their customers. Even if they do end the world, the apocalypse can be filed away as a Q3 problem. With a maniacal glint in his eye, the buyer, a man you will come to know as Samuel, approves the transaction on his phone. Once the transaction is complete, he receives the envelope. Pleasure doing business with you. Now, it's time for the next phase of the plan. 1 p.m., 11 hours until the new year. Dr. Dan paces his containment chamber. Another year in his own personal cell. Wonderful. His never-ending quest to slay the monster so intrinsically tied to his own life and his own identity, SCP-096, has remained fruitless. If only they approved his cross-test faster. If only they allowed him to explore the full extent of the Foundation's destructive capabilities. They could have had this terrible wretch destroyed long before now. But no, they wait. They bide their time. They let more people die. He keeps reading up on the incidents. The latest one wiped out an entire mobile task force during a botched retrieval event. Highly trained operatives tossed aside like cannon fodder. It disgusted him, even more so knowing that his skill and expertise could be used to end the creature once and for all, if only the Foundation would just let him off the chain. They'd see. Soon they'd all see. He had no idea how right he is. 2 p.m., 10 hours until the new year. A package arrives in the mailroom of Site-19. Naturally, there's a thorough screening process for potential cognitohazards. A large group of D-classes in partitioned-off cubicles reads through all the letters, just to make sure they're on the first line of defense for a memetic kill agent that was intended for admin. Things get worse when one of the D-classes opens a letter that says, "Dear SCP Foundation, thanks for all the memories. Happy New Year. Signed, S." Included in the letter was a strange photograph of a hideous pale face. He calls his superior over the built-in cubicle phone and is confused when the superior begins to panic. Not long after, a huge hideous monster comes barreling through the wall, its white claws extended. 3 p.m., 9 hours until the new year. Samuel takes an Amtrak to New York, smiling at the thought of the carnage unfolding at the SCP Foundation's flagship containment site. Perhaps that would kill a few of those worthless pencil pushers. Were he a lesser man, he might have stopped there, but no, he has far more ambitious plans in mind. The new year was almost upon them, and when it did arrive, he was going to ensure that whoever was left alive would know the pain that he once knew. Though if his plan succeeded, he didn't expect that there would be all that many survivors left to mourn the dead. His train arrives at Grand Central Station. 4 p.m., 8 hours until the new year. The Foundation picks through the rubble of the mailroom. A sack is placed over SCP-096's head, and it's dragged back to the metal cube of its containment chamber to be resealed. There were 36 casualties during the containment breach. Luckily, the photo was mostly destroyed, meaning it didn't present any more danger to Foundation personnel. Analysis on the paper, however, yielded a terrifying discovery. This was not an original photograph. It was a Xerox. So who had the original? 5 p.m., 7 hours until the new year. Samuel had planned it all perfectly. He knew the exact address of the New York City NYE Planning Committee. He also knows exactly where to find all the techies ironing out the last kinks in the show for the big LEDs of Times Square. He infiltrates the building easily, dressed as a maintenance man, with a silenced pistol hidden inside his overalls. He just needs to lay low until the time comes. 6 p.m., 6 hours until the new year. As the day draws on, the Foundation continues to investigate the origin of the photo that caused the latest outbreak. The knowledge that there was someone out there with additional copies of a photo of 096's face, and with it enough knowledge of the Foundation to get the photo into their mailroom, was extremely frightening to the administration, and the note hinting at the mysterious S behind it all. Things only got worse when a Foundation informant embedded inside Marshall, Carter & Dark revealed that someone bought a photograph of SCP-096 at an incredibly high price. What they're doing with it now is still a mystery, but they'll soon find out. 7 p.m., 5 hours until the new year. Not long now. Samuel has waited so long to make his plan for vengeance a reality. When he notices the coast is clear, he enters the office of the NYE Project's technical director. Before the director has any idea what's happening, Samuel wraps his arms around the man's neck, and chokes him to death. His death will be so much kinder than the deaths that will come later. Samuel tosses the man's body aside and approaches his computer. He makes a single addition to the very end of the NYE presentation, 096.png. Everyone will be welcoming the new year in the most horrifying way possible. 8 p.m., 4 hours until the new year. Over at Site-19, everyone is in a panic. The subtext is clear. The first attack on the site was just a prelude to a bigger New Year's Eve attack. They would be preparing for a more dangerous attack elsewhere. The instruction was given to find the New Year's Eve events that would have the maximum potential for damage on civilians. A list was drawn up, and the Times Square New Year's Eve event was at the top of that list. 9 p.m., 3 hours until the new year. As the terrible plan draws close, Foundation researchers hit a breakthrough. They find the identity of the man who might destroy the world, and it hits so much closer to home than they ever possibly could have thought. Samuel Rothkin, a decorated member of a Foundation mobile task force, until now believed to have been killed in action in the most recent SCP-096 containment breach. Turns out, that hadn't actually been the case. The rest of the squad were all slaughtered during the breach, but he'd been able to avert his eyes at the crucial moment. He'd escaped the scene, leaving the site of the massacre. It wasn't hard to intuit that he felt betrayed by the Foundation, sending him and his team to die. Having to hear the sound of them being torn apart, but unable to even do them the decency of witnessing it, now he would make everyone witness the suffering, and the Foundation did not have long to stop him. 10 p.m., 2 hours until the new year. The very best of the Foundation's computer specialists, AI constructs, and web crawlers hope to seek out the code Samuel was using to release the 096 image, those awful murderous pixels that could ruin it all. Soon enough, they triangulate the location, with little more than an hour to spare. It's coming from a building in the vicinity of Times Square, as tourists pour in by the hundreds of thousands to enjoy the festivities. They will be a captive audience, staring at whatever Samuel wanted to show them on those giant screens. And they know exactly what that will be. 11 p.m., 1 hour until the new year. Every part of Samuel's plan seems to be coming into fruition, as he watches from an office of one of the many anonymous high-rises around Times Square. Samuel has nothing but contempt for the ignorant masses below, all the blood and the friends he's lost to keep them safe. The old Foundation motto loops through his head: "We die in the dark, so that you may live in the light." Now it's their turn to see what the dark truly looks like. He checks his watch as the time passes. It isn't long before there's only minutes left. Glorious. He isn't even fazed when a group of other Mobile Task Force operatives, his former brethren, march up behind him, telling him to freeze and turn around. "Well, which one is it?" he says with a smile. They tell him they're deploying a temporary signal jammer for all the major networks in attendance, and they've intercepted the code put in place to project 096's face onto the screens of Times Square. "No, you've intercepted the decoy code," he says, and reaches for his gun. The MTF agents rip him to shreds in a hail of gunfire. As he lays on the floor of the office, dying, he still smiles. It worked. It actually worked. Across the country at Site-19, the metal cube breaks again. Midnight, the new year. The Foundation has done everything they can, but not every life can be saved. Almost 1 million people have already seen the monster's face, standing like bowling pins arranged in Times Square. And here comes the ball. SCP-096 shatters through the glass and concrete of Times Square and collides with the crowd, all jaws and claws. Blood soon smears the asphalt. Screams bloat the air. There's ripping and tearing. People scatter like ants across the city, spreading off into every street in every direction. As the Shy Guy continues his massacre, more die in the stampede, crushed under the feet of their fellow terrified victims. The security stationed at the event level their handguns and rifles at the monster and start to fire, but their bullets have no effect. Back at Site-19, the Foundation has entered panic mode. Thanks to their efforts, the live feeds around the Times Square event have been cut, buying the rest of the world some time. But at least 1 million lives in the center of the United States' largest city are gone. After all, those that see the Shy Guy's face are considered lost. But now they needed to live up to their middle initial and contain this nightmare before it got way out of hand. While 1 million dead was a tragedy, if those millions started live streaming to TikTok, or the crowd dispersion spread far enough out into the city that it created a domino effect of Shy Guy witnesses, while keeping it below 5 million casualties would be nothing short of a miracle at that point. Foundation Mobile Task Force helicopters are en route, but that's more of a formality at this point. An order has been made to withdraw all Foundation ground agents from the city as quickly as possible, as the matter is passed up the chain for the O5 Council to come to their ultimate determination. In a clandestine room among several of the Council's senior members, a decision is made, one of the most horrifying decisions in the long and sordid history of the Foundation, but it's one that in the eyes of the Council is the only way they can possibly save the world at large from falling prey to the deadly anomalous effects of SCP-096. Approval is given to fire a nuclear warhead into the heart of New York City. The ICBM is fired from a silo on American soil to ensure that it reaches the city before things get any more out of hand. It takes to the sky, a brutal hellbird, and sails towards its target. The streets are awash with carnage. People scream and run as the Shy Guy tears through them. Thousands of lives have been lost already, and it's just getting started. It remorselessly does its work, never tiring, never relenting. Regardless of race or gender or age, it slaughters. In the chaos, some reach to pull out their phones. They have to document it, if only to prove to themselves that it exists. They reach for the live buttons on their various apps, having no idea that in doing so, they'll doom everyone who watches. But before they can do that, they find themselves looking up. There's a deafening roar from the sky, and a flash of bright white light. Tens of millions of lives are fried off the face of the earth in an instant, with the intention of saving millions more. Once the dust has settled, the cybernetic mobile task force Samsara, cloned from the flesh of a dead god, are sent in with integrated scramble technology to retrieve SCP-096, still regenerating its flesh around its indestructible skeleton. Samsara are the only ones who could even survive such a mission. It's a mission that the Foundation clings to as a desperate attempt to justify the atrocity they had orchestrated, an atrocity committed under the guise of good. If anything about this can be called good. Gamma would never forget the horrific sight of SCP-5967. On the surface, she kept her nerve, cool and collected, her finger ready to squeeze the trigger as her weapon stayed trained on the entity. But deep down, it turned her stomach. After all, how is someone meant to react when they see a thing like that? A mess of flesh and eyeballs towering above them, staring back through more retinas than any living creature has. She did not yet know it, but she'd still be seeing that disgusting pillar of musculature and eyes in her nightmares for months to come. And still, it wasn't even the worst part of the incursion. Far worse than seeing the 5-meter-tall eyeball totem, watching it blink its many lids at her, was witnessing what it had done to Alpha. Only moments before, Gamma's commanding officer had been in control of this situation, leading Mobile Task Force Lambda 5 into the meadowlands of East Rutherford, New Jersey. The mission should have been a simple smash and grab, the same old boring story their team had lived through countless times before. Pick up a high-value target, the leader of yet another cult practicing an anomalous religion, and bring him in for questioning. Gamma never could have expected that things would go this badly. The task force had arrived to discover Caesar Winters, the leader of a sect of Fifths operating in New Jersey. When Lambda 5 discovered him, Winters and his followers, locals who were all members of a group known as the Commune, were standing in a circle around an instance of SCP-5967. Standing at around 5 meters in height, SCP-5967s were piles comprised of mostly musculature and organs that resembled eyeballs, human eyeballs. Despite lacking a mouth, vocal cords, or any other conventional methods of speech, these pillars could still very much communicate verbally, although they had little to say besides spouting phrases and principles associated with the Fifthist ideology. Almost immediately, the plan to capture Winters had gone awry. It was almost like he expected the Foundation to arrive, like he knew they were coming. As the members of MTF Lambda-5 moved in, keeping Winters in their sights, the anomalous cult leader somehow turned the gaze of SCP-5967 onto Alpha. The team's field commander ordered Delta to open fire, taking out Caesar Winters in a single shot, but only for a moment. Another of the commune members kneeled over and began convulsing. A wound formed at the person's neck, and from it emerged Caesar Winters' face. It grew into a full-sized head, replacing that of the commune member, giving Winters a brand new body in moments. On Alpha's orders to stop Winters from hopping to more bodies, Gamma and the others in their team fired on the other cultists. Everyone was terminated. 15 seconds was all it took. Then they moved towards SCP-5967, and everything went wrong. The bodies started to convulse violently, as if some unseen hand was shaking them around like ragdolls. Gamma watched as they began to levitate, hoisted by their necks and floating towards the mobile task force. Not one of them knew what to do, keeping their rifles up and trained on the corpses. Each one folded in on itself, becoming compressed masses of muscle embedded with eyes. That was when the team lost Alpha. Something was happening to their leader. She had dropped her weapon and fallen to her knees. Immediately, Gamma moved in to help her commander, trying to pull her back to her feet, but Alpha was resisting, transfixed by SCP-5967. It's her. She is lost deep in the cosmos and is angry with us for not helping her find her way back. She will kill us all, lest we lie in our brains and see her for who she truly is. Gamma watched as her team leaders rushed towards the pillar of eyes and licked it. The floating orbs of flesh and eyes that had once been people suddenly hurtled towards the members of MTF Lambda-5 at high speed. Gamma dove clear at the vital moment, performing a tactical role and managing to narrowly avoid being struck. Beta wasn't so lucky. Ready to retaliate, Gamma raises a weapon to fire at the floating remains, only to hear Alpha ordering her to stop. She had stopped licking SCP-5967, but whatever influence had compromised the mobile task force leader hadn't relinquished its hold over her. She grinned unnervingly as her eyes rolled back into her head. Don't you hear her voice? She is angry, but I can save you. I can save us. Let me show you, Alpha said, before charging at Gamma with her arms outstretched. In seconds before she could defend against her commanding officer, Gamma found herself pounced upon by Alpha. Grabbing a nearby rock, Alpha swung at her head and knocked Gamma's tactical helmet clean off. Pinning her down, possessed by some unknown anomalous entity, Alpha held open Gamma's eyelids and licked her eyeball. Gamma screamed in horror as Alpha looked up to the sky and yelled, "I can see you! I can see everything now!" The case of SCP-5967 is one of the stranger tales within the annals of the SCP Foundation's history. Their investigation that led to the discovery of these 5-foot-tall pillars of eyes and muscle originally began with a different intention. The commune had been making waves in Lyndhurst, New Jersey, the kind of waves that had caught the SCP Foundation's attention. The two leaders of this apparent cult were Salem Steros and Caesar Winters, both of whom seemed to be able to use SCP-5967s to take control of the local residents' minds. Anyone that they affected could be controlled remotely by either Steros or Winters, with a seemingly unlimited range and no known way of relinquishing their control over an affected person. Amnestic treatments, hypnotherapy, none of the Foundation's usual methods had worked. Undercover Foundation operatives working secretly within the Lyndhurst Police Department were the first to discover an instance of SCP-5967 right under their noses. Literally, the pillar of eyeballs seemed to have sprouted up right in the middle of the Lyndhurst police station. The Foundation sent in containment teams to secure the area and administer amnestics to witnesses. But just how were Steros and Winters causing these monstrous musculature monoliths to appear? Well, the pair operated a radio show together, known as the Reality Sync. The Foundation agents within Lyndhurst had been unable to track down exactly where they were broadcasting from. However, after the SCP-5967 instance appeared within the police station, the answer seemed to present itself. During the building's reconstruction, tapes of their radio show were recovered, seeming to suggest that the pair had been utilizing anomalous means to broadcast the reality sync from within the station itself. while keeping themselves concealed. The Reality Sync was a religious talk show, specifically focused on discussing elements of Fifithism with the audience and callers who phoned in to Winters and Steros's hidden studio. What exactly is Fifithism? Well, there's no easy answer to that question, unfortunately. Other anomalous cults and religions at least have a core tenet or belief at their center. Sarkicism is the worship of disease and decay, while Mechanites from the Church of the Broken God venerate technology. The beliefs of the Fifth Church are a little more interchangeable, however. They don't really have any defined theology or religious practices. Fifithism is often more just a collection of recurring ideas and motifs, the number 5, stars, and the belief in an external cosmic god, often a malicious one. In fact, if there is a defining principle of Fifithism, it's that it's an anomalous way of thinking that it can't really be understood. Practitioners of Fifithism are concerned primarily with transcending reality as we perceive it. They are highly interested in entities and anomalies that can warp and shape reality, to the extent of even being fearful of such beings. A lot of Fifithists seek to not only spread their influence to others through any means necessary, including brainwashing, but also hope to transcend humanity to a higher plane of reality, the fifth dimension. There, in theory, a person would cease to be a human being, and wouldn't even really be akin to a god or powerful reality bender. Instead, they would become something more vague, a concept, unable to be fully defined or to exist in reality completely. Fifithists follow this goal, presumably with the intention of saving humankind from reality-warping anomalies, and they'll use any infectious brainwashing methods at their disposal to bring as many people as they can into their way of thinking. This brings us neatly back to Caesar Winters and Salem Steros's radio show, The Reality Sync. This was the communes, their particular sect of Fifithism's, way of spreading what they referred to as the truth. Based on the various fragmented cassette recordings of their show that the SCP Foundation were able to recover, both Steros and Winters believed in a many-armed goddess, referring to it as only she or her. They encouraged their listeners to pray to this entity and let her know that they were loyal to her. During one of their recovered broadcasts, the pair of Fifithists hosts were even able to prank call the SCP Foundation itself. One junior researcher Jones was contacted by the two men and ridiculed for his association with the SCP Foundation. But after a few jokes at junior researcher Jones's expense, Steros and Winters began to insidiously implant ideas of Fifithism in the researcher's head. They referred to this as giving Jones the truth, something they both intended to do for all of their listeners in order to save them. When asked what they really meant, Winters and Steros made vague allusions to the truth being an infinite knowledge that only she could bestow. Jones had no idea who she was meant to be.
"Our guiding light, our creator," Salem described, before adding, "the very thoughts that should be infiltrating your head right now."
It seemed that through this call, the two hosts had managed to successfully embed their Fifithist concepts into the mind of junior researcher Jones, and they weren't about to stop there. During another call on their show, both hosts spoke with a Wallington, New Jersey resident named Wendy Ricefield, who was already a self-proclaimed Fifithist. Steros and Winters talked Wendy through a ritual to learn the truth, involving her drawing sigils on the walls and floor of her home and lighting candles. The phone line picked up wet squelching noises coming from the other side, the splintering of wood, and Wendy screaming for help as she tried to run from her home, only for something to drag her back inside. Eventually, the Foundation made the executive decision to step in and deal with the situation in New Jersey directly. Steros and Winters' operation was getting out of hand. More and more people in the surrounding area were being brainwashed into believing in Fifithist concepts and compelled to complete bizarre rituals. Sending a team in to apprehend the cult leaders, Foundation personnel discovered Salem Steros and numerous other members of the commune. They had gathered at an instance of SCP-5967 that had manifested in Wallington, the same place that Wendy Ricefield had been from. Steros and his Fifithist followers were discovered holding hands and standing in a circle around the anomalous pillar of eyeballs, as well as approaching it and licking SCP-5967. The members of the commune were rounded up, and most were sent to be kept in isolation at Site 9. However, Salem Steros was brought to Site 83 for questioning.
Junior researcher Umar Hadid conducted an interview as to the exact nature of the goddess Her that Steros and Winters often referred to, and the anomalous rituals the pair had been involved with. Salem was less than cooperative. He demanded to be set free in the interest of saving people by spreading the truth with Caesar. However, he did reveal some key information about Her. According to Steros' claims, she was a goddess actively meddling with reality and influencing human actions. He told Hadid that if he killed the junior researcher right there, it would be because she willed it. Sometime before, both Salem and his cult co-leader Caesar had been stargazing in the Meadowlands, a remote field in East Rutherford. That's when they had allegedly heard her voice and being told the truth. This reality-warping goddess was intending to return home, but that way was broken. So according to Steros, she needed their help. This was the reason he and Winters began creating instances of SCP-5967. The eyeball pillars apparently acted as beacons, like a GPS signal allowing Her to come back. The pair and the rest of the commune were attempting to prove their loyalty to Her, in the hopes that they would potentially be allowed to transcend reality, in accordance with the Fifthist Principle. Salem Steros was remained into SCP Foundation custody and kept detained in a containment suite surrounded by 3 Scranton reality anchors. Shortly after, the members of MTF Lambda 5 were dispatched, heading to the location Steros had inadvertently revealed during his interrogation. Their mission was to arrest Caesar Winters, who remained at large after the leader of Lambda 5 was compromised. Eventually, Gamma was able to contact the Foundation, who sent a containment team as backup. They secured the surviving MTF operative along with the infected team leader, Alpha, and the instance of SCP-5967 on the scene. Gamma was offered medical treatment and presented with a Silver Lion badge for her efforts in the field, along with a 2-week vacation as a reward. That did little to stop the nightmares, though. She wasn't the same, and neither was Alpha. After 2 long weeks of psychological screening, and no further hostile or anomalous activity, Alpha was interviewed by junior researcher Hadid. During their discussion, Alpha, real name Cassandra Sandy Danofsky, described that she could still hear voices in her head, rambling about the truth, Fifthism, and eyeballs. Amnestic treatment wasn't helping. Suddenly, someone within the Foundation played a clip of Caesar Winters' voice over the facility speakers, taken from one of his and Steros' radio broadcasts. It triggered an instant paranoid reaction from Sandy, followed by her opening her mouth and revealing something growing inside. Another eyeball. Some kind of post-hypnotic suggestion or other form of brainwashing had affected her, and she began exhibiting anomalous behavior. "Tell me, Hadid, are you a Fifthist now?" she asked the junior researcher. "Are you ready to see the truth?" Hadid rushed out of the room, shutting the door behind him. Pacing around the room, Sandy started drawing strange sigils of unknown origin on the floor and walls, lighting a candle through anomalous means. Then there came a bright flash of light as a 4-legged entity appeared and attacked Alpha. The two merged, causing her body to change until it was unrecognizable. Well, as human anyway. Standing in the interrogation room where Sandy had been standing was a contorted mass of flesh and muscle, with multiple eyeballs staring out from it. She had turned into another instance of SCP-5967. They all had. They were people. Steros and Winters had made beacons out of living people. You're a pizza delivery person for a company we're not at liberty to name. It may seem like a thankless job, but you're part of the thin crust between satisfaction and starvation for people who really don't feel like cooking or going out tonight. You're a tried and true pizza veteran. You've seen a lot on the job. From people who try to rob you on their own doorsteps to one guy who tried to tip you with a clearly fake Rolex. But you haven't seen anything like the insanity you're about to encounter tonight. That's because you're about to get sick. Really, really sick. And we know there's probably a lot of diseases you'd rather not catch. But trust us, no disease bites quite like SCP-3760. But back to you. You're parked on the saddle of your prized bicycle, pedaling for your life. The biggest order you've ever delivered strapped to the cargo rack behind you. 8 large meat feast pizzas. You figure you're heading towards the most hopping or at least the hungriest party in the city. And despite the frustration of needing to ferry this hot, cheesy nightmare to its destination, parties have historically been pretty good tippers. Little do you know, Your prized customer is about to give you much more than just a tip. You pull outside their ground-level apartment and park your bike. There's no music coming from the apartment you're heading to. Strange. You pick up your precious cargo and trudge towards the door, barely managing to ring the bell with your spare pinky. The door swings open instantly, as though the occupant was just standing behind it the whole time, waiting for you. When the door opens, you're not sure what to make of what you see inside. There isn't a party. There doesn't even seem to be a group. Just one person standing there and staring at you. And something about this person is just wrong. His skin seems to be an oddly unnatural color. It has a slightly gray hue, like it's rotting, and you see that the stranger's shirt is torn in several places. You're trying your best to remain professional and not stare, but you notice that whatever is under these tears doesn't look like skin. It's almost like there are holes all over his body underneath the shirt. Big, gaping holes. And are those? You're cut off when he takes the pile of pizzas from you and shoves what was once a handful of dollars into your palm. They seem torn up, and worst of all, wet. You look past your strange customer and see that his apartment looks just as shoddy as he does. There's stuffing torn from the couch, huge tears in the curtains. What you could swear are scratch or bite marks on some of the wooden furniture. This man clearly needed his pizza. As you begin to step away, happy to just be rid of this freaky situation, you do something that you'll live to regret. Just for a moment, you lock eyes with the customer. There's something about them that makes you feel sick. They're wet and black, more like a doll's eyes than anything that should belong to a human. Just that one instant of contact is enough to chill your bones. And according to some theories around SCP-3760, it may have been the moment of your infection. As the stranger closes the door in your face, presumably to eat his obscene number of pizzas, you stumble back to your bicycle, letting your torn-up, gooey tip blow away in the wind. Getting out of this place is rewarding enough, but you can't chase the thoughts of the stranger out of your mind. Was he sick? Was he even human? These are the thoughts swimming through your head as you cycle back to the restaurant. You're so preoccupied you don't even notice the truck speeding towards you. You get sideswiped, destroying your bike and throwing you in the air. You can feel the snap of your arm breaking as you land. It's a horrible feeling to go along with the horrible noise. And as you fade from consciousness, the last thought in your mind is the black, soulless eyes of the customer. When you wake up, you'll find that you're in a hospital bed with your arm in a cast. The doctors tell you that you're phenomenally lucky to be alive given the severity of the crash. The doctor says that you're dealing with a compound fracture in your right arm, as well as some nasty cuts that required stitches, but otherwise, you're fine. The hospital insists that you at least stay the night though, and you oblige. But that night, you find it's difficult to sleep. Partially because of the pain, but mostly because of an extremely strange sound coming from inside the cast around your arm. It's a scraping noise, like something sharp scratching at the interior. You figure it must just be some strange side effect of the pain meds. You're not going to let worry eat you up on the inside. Something else will be doing that soon enough. You're discharged from the hospital the next day and told that you should be fine in a couple of months, as though that's some kind of consolation. You try to carry on with your daily life as much as you can with one arm out of commission, but that awful crunching noise from inside your cast persists. You even start to become paranoid that some sort of insect is trapped inside, or worse, a swarm of insects. But you aren't left with that uncertainty for long. By the next morning, your cast has fallen off. Well, not fallen, per se. A more accurate description would be that it was chewed off from the inside. And not by something trapped in there with your arm, but by your arm itself. When you finally see it, it doesn't even look like an arm anymore. The flesh has turned gray, that same sickly gray of the customer's skin the night of your accident. But worse still, from the top of the hand down to the base of the forearm, your entire arm is split open into a fang-lined, chattering mouth. When you've gotten over the initial horror of seeing the mutations that have taken hold of your arm, you notice something about the teeth in the second mouth. They're nothing like human teeth. They're vicious, jagged triangles, each one like a dagger. These are unmistakably shark's teeth. You give yourself the luxury of having a good scream. After all, what else are you supposed to do after you find your arm has turned into some kind of fleshy shark mutant? you notice that you can hardly even feel the snapping of its jaws, like it isn't even really a part of you. And as much as you try to tense and release what used to be the tendons in your forearm, there is no change. For all intents and purposes, that limb is no longer yours. It just happens to be attached to you. Not only that, but it's always very, very hungry, as quickly became evident from the fact it made such short work of the cast that had been containing it not long ago. You can see that the graying flesh is beginning to spread from your forearm to your bicep. It's almost like little by little, your tissue is being switched. Somehow you're innately aware that if you don't feed your arm, it'll get even worse. Suddenly, everything about the strange customer from the night of the accident makes sense. He had whatever you have now, only worse. He was just hoping that the pizzas would keep the beast at bay, and you very much hope the contents of your fridge will do the same. Wasting no time, you grab some processed ham and raw chicken. You're not an idiot. You know that if this thing is anything like a real shark, it's only going to be interested in meat. But when you shove the processed meat into the nibbling maw on your forearm, you notice that it seems to spit the food out. Something tells you that your offering was too dead. Now you're really afraid. Will this thing want live prey? Will that be the only way to stop it from taking the rest of your arm or even more? The thought terrifies you. It's like being Venom, except you don't even get a new alien friend or any cool superpowers for your trouble, but you're smart. You're resourceful. You don't intend to let this thing take over your life without a fight, and you've always believed what G.I. Joe taught you. Knowing is half the battle. Sadly, doing an internet search for "my injury is somehow mutating into a shark, how do I stop this?" didn't do much good. And you don't want to go to a doctor, because part of you expects to be immediately shipped off to the nearest circus or military research lab. Instead, you throw on a thick leather jacket that you hope your new shark arm will take a while to eat through, and head to the library of the nearest medical college. If anywhere has sources on the most obscure of medical problems, this would be the place. And after hours of searching through index cards, you find it. What seems to be the one and only source of this ludicrous topic in the thousands and thousands of books. A series of journal entries made by Dr. Keith Woodward, ship's medical officer aboard the USS Kirby, circa 1922. Even the library's indexing system prefaces the source with a disclaimer that it's likely 25% quackery and 75% ocean madness. But that doesn't deter you, and he poured in a storm. Dr. Woodward told the horrifying tale of the USS Kirby's collapse due to a sudden and unexplainable contagion. It began with the infection of a sailor on the ship named Willis Riggs, who'd fallen overboard and had his foot partially eaten by a shark. Much like your arm, the man's foot slowly became the ravenous, all-devouring mouth of a shark itself. Little by little, it spread to the other crew members through unknown means. Any injuries sustained by the crew didn't heal like normal, but instead became this vicious living shark tissue. Soon these ever-hungry new mouths led them to eat each other, and then themselves from the inside out. Even after the humans they once were could be considered long dead, those hungry jaws kept snapping. There was no cure. There was no solution. Everyone on the boat was recorded as having mysteriously died at sea. That is the curse of SCP-3760. And as if on cue, you look down to see that the shark's mouth in your arm has chewed through the leather of your sleeve like it's nothing. It's hungry, and nothing will satiate it. But perhaps some sacrifices need to be made if you want to stop it from getting worse. Just as the thought crosses your mind, a needle full of sedative is injected into your neck. Everything goes dark very quickly, and when you wake up, you're in a clean, clinical white room. You are now officially under containment by the SCP Foundation. Not that you'll know that anytime soon. This may seem like the cavalry has arrived, but sadly for your sake, they have no interest in curing you. They're just eager to gather more data on how your condition progresses. SCP-3760 exists as a latent infection in well over half of humanity, but its horrific mutating effects are activated in only a relative few. There have only been 2,785 recorded cases of SCP-3760 activity observed between 1958 and 2016. This is thanks to the Foundation's secret weapon against the shark mutation menace, Subliminal Mimetic Agent Kappa Omicron, or SMA-KO, a widely distributed mimetic agent that suppresses the symptoms of infection in most people. Not that this would provide much comfort to you. as you join the almost 3,000 others who have been infected, and you are doomed to slowly turn into an abomination in your containment chamber. If it's any consolation, you may not see the truly advanced stages of the disease. The most common cause of death among the afflicted is being eaten by their own ravenous shark mouths long before it changes your entire body. Actually, come to think of it, that's not much of a consolation at all. But hey, when it comes to anomalous mutations, we're sad to report that there's rarely a happy ending in store for those afflicted, and SCP-3760 is no exception to the rule. SCP-173. It's a peculiar statue with a bad attitude and a penchant for strangulation and snapping necks, though only if nobody has maintained unbroken eye contact with it. Some know it as the sculpture, some know it as the peanut, some know it as probably the most important anomaly of all, considering it's the one that got this whole crazy affair started. But today we're here to ask an important question. Do any of us really know it at all? After all, its original file is hardly comprehensive. You might even venture to say it's one of the most enigmatic SCPs out there, despite its popularity. But today we're taking a dive beneath the concrete, rebar, and Krylon brand spray paint to give you the real inside scoop on SCP-173. We've broken into the SCP Foundation archive and found 10 different important files on this infamous vertebrate vandal, and we're going to explore each and every one of them with you today. As you can expect from the Weird and Wild SCP Foundation, they cover possible pasts, presents, and futures, and some of them will naturally contradict. But that just gives you more of an opportunity to immerse yourself and compare them. We often like to believe that the real truth is somewhere in between, so make sure you pay attention to every detail throughout. So let's get this show on the road and explore our 10 documents of interest for SCP-173 in hopes of finally getting the complete story. And, of course, don't blink. Document 1. Crunch. Where better to start than the mind of the sinister sculpture itself? Crunch gives us an insight into the private thoughts of this otherwise pretty uncommunicative monster and reveals a great deal about its relationship with its favorite activity, snapping the necks of anyone who dares look away from it. In Crunch, SCP-173 speaks in very basic, broken, Rorschach-esque English, saying things like,
"Room dark, people gone, can move. I happy, trapped for years. Kept by a man for research, left alone in room, left to scratch at walls, left to rot and die unless needed. Specimen for research, trapped by self, never seen by others, never spoken. Listen, but never speak. See, but never seen. Made of rock when others come, free when they not look. Prisoner when they look back. I hate."
SCP-173 hates and resents its captors for keeping it confined. In its own mind, crunch, how it refers to the snapping of its victim's neck, is the only thing that gives its life a sense of meaning. It will continue to crunch for as long as it's contained, because thanks to the SCP Foundation, crunch is all it has left these days. Document 2. How 173 got to Site-19. This semi-origin story is one that the fans of this channel will be familiar with. While it doesn't give us any insight into why this nasty pile of concrete actually exists, it does inform us why it's currently our problem. SCP-173 isn't actually an anomaly native to our universe. However, its native dimension was destroyed by the beast trapped in SCP-2317, the Devourer of Worlds. As is standard procedure for a universe about to experience an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario, the Foundation's Department of Extra-Dimensional Affairs swooped in and collected all the valuable anomalies before the world went down the tube. One of these was, of course, SCP-173, which was vacated to Site-19 in our dimension in 1993. Do you think we would have been better off if we just left him for the Devourer of Worlds to take care of? Let us know what you think about that down in the comments. Document 3. The Black Moon. Sometimes you can be your own worst enemy. If the file on SCP-001, the Black Moon, is to be believed, the SCP Foundation may actually be behind the creation of this ornery objet d'art. Though in the Foundation's defense, it was in service of potentially fighting off a far more deadly foe. the ominous extra-dimensional being known only as the Black Moon. One attempt to stop the Black Moon from destroying the universe was known as the Key Project, which involved creating a number of items linked to the Black Moon via conceptual engineering that would hopefully nullify its effects. The objects needed the following qualities: an inability to act while under observation, a hostility towards human life, and the capacity to end conscious life if given the opportunity. Those three descriptions fit SCP-173 to a T, and it was considered the project's greatest success. However, it sadly wasn't enough to actually stop the horrific rampage of the Black Moon. The researcher managing the case, Dr. Moto, was so ashamed by the failure that he willingly entered SCP-173's containment chamber and got his neck snapped in the process. Document 4. Conclusions regarding D-173-2263 incident. This document finds its origins in the video analysis of a Foundation researcher with an incredibly powerful name, Dr. Delano Smasher. Dr. Smasher had closely observed video footage of SCP-173 killing several members of D-Class personnel, and began formulating a new theory about how 173 actually killed its victims. Dr. Smasher theorized, after all, that something with arms as short as SCP-173 and no opposable digits would have trouble effectively strangling or snapping human necks. According to Dr. Smasher's observations, SCP-173 doesn't actually make any physical contact with its victims. Instead, the victims feel oddly compelled to look at the creature if ever nothing is looking at it. Their eyes will snap open, and their heads will twist at any angle they need to in order to look at the creature in the eyes. It's the sheer force of this sudden change that often leads to snapping necks and bruised faces for the victims, not the sculpture itself physically causing the damage. If Dr. Smasher is to be believed, the sculpture is deadly purely because it simply demands to be looked at by somebody at all times. Document 5. Anniversary. This brings us nicely to our next document, Anniversary, positing a different theory for the mysterious creation of SCP-173. This comes from the perspective of said possible creator, an anomalous entity that we'll call the Artist. Much like the unfortunate Dr. Moto, the Artist, an intelligent being that can seemingly become invisible and intangible at will, considered SCP-173 to be its finest creation. It viewed SCP-173 as a perfect representation of humanity. It does nothing but bleed and defecate, and if anyone refuses to pay attention to it, it kills them. It was a perfect symbol of the Artist's contempt for humanity. It even easily snuck into Site-19 to visit SCP-173 on the anniversary of its creation, and found the Foundation's lack of appreciation for this fine creation. As an act of revenge for keeping his creation locked up and out of sight for so long, he gave the sculpture permission just once to kill someone who looked away, even if others were still looking at it. For SCP-173, this would be considered a wonderful little treat. Document 6. Her Masterpiece. This next document, known as Her Masterpiece, suggests that SCP-173 was created by a very different kind of artist. While this potential creator of SCP-173 was somehow able to produce an anomaly, she was not anomalous herself, just motivated by rage and revenge. She'd been pregnant in the past but lost the baby due to the actions of a man whom she considered her greatest enemy. She vowed to make art from his demise. The woman murdered her enemy with a baseball bat before using concrete and rebar to build SCP-173 around him, almost as a way to mock her fallen foe. However, like something out of a horror movie, this act of murderous creation somehow imbued SCP-173 with life. When this spiteful artist had eventually finished the creation and started to walk away, it claimed her as its first victim. The last thing she remembered hearing was the sound of concrete scraping against the ground, and then a nasty crunch before everything went dark. Document 7. Regarding the statue. From one tragedy to another. The document regarding the statue shows the journey of researcher Marcus Silburn from idealistic young employee to full-on mental breakdown after trying and failing to gain control of SCP-173. He entered the SCP-173 project with bright eyes and big ideas about how to contain the sculpture, suggesting that the human element be removed entirely in order to reduce risk to Foundation personnel. He proposed ideas like introducing a sprinkler and drainage system to the chamber and using a sentient AI and remote viewing technology to keep SCP-173 immobilized. However, he was then enlightened to some frustrating and frightening facts about SCP-173. In the absence of actual present human observation, the same buildup of feces and blood that the creature somehow excretes builds up in any technology used to control or contain it. It destroys the circuit boards of AIs, takes flying camera drones out of the sky, and even degrades the locks on its chamber doors, leading to the brutal death of a janitor in the hall. Researcher Silburn advanced far enough through the ranks of the Foundation to be in direct communication with Dr. Jack Bright, the director of Site-19. After his final attempt at containing the creature without direct human observation resulted in a containment breach and the death of 12 people, Silburn was moved off the SCP-173 case after breaking down and begging for permission to terminate the anomaly. Permission was denied. Dr. Bright closed the document with a note to a member of the O5 Council reading, "It can be surmised that our conclusion was correct. The object, for whatever reason, desires or requires human attention and will not be denied it." Document 8. A Chance at Freedom. We once again return to the direct perspective of SCP-173, but this differs vastly from the perspective of SCP-173's inner monologue presented in Crunch. According to the document entitled A Chance at Freedom, SCP-173 was actually an incredibly intelligent agent of espionage, sent from another dimension along with its unknown cadet, though the cadet is heavily implied to be SCP-096. This piece details a containment breach from SCP-173's perspective, as it is shown looking down on humanity and its primitive technology. It laments the fact that it lost its weapon during the interdimensional transfer, and it seethes that if it still had its weapon, this all would have played out very differently. Despite conceding the fact that it underestimated the humans, which was the main reason it ended up in containment, it spends the majority of the document touting its own superiority, until one of the SCP-131, the iBots, turned up and froze it in place. The degree to which SCP-173 hates the iBots cannot be overstated. Document 9. Experiences with SCP-682. Of course, no full-story video on SCP-173 would be complete without a discussion of the SCP-682 cross-tests. A number of researchers, though particularly the very persistent Dr. Carlson, decided to use SCP-173 in various manners, in hopes of finally doing in that damn lizard. In their first engagement, 682 seemed rightfully frightened of 173, and when a sniper shot its eyes out, 173 immediately snapped its neck. Of course, it grew back a series of sniper-proof eyes not long after. Someone next suggested SCP-173 being sent in with a picture of 096 taped to its chest, though this was rejected as being ridiculous and an incredibly dangerous idea to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Bright. The researchers then went after SCP-682 with high-precision blades, cutting it to pieces, each of which became autonomously dangerous enemies. SCP-173 then began to murder each of those blobs of the mutated tissue, until it stopped when a D-Class was sent in to stare at it, while the rest of 682 regenerated. SCP-173 was transported back to its cell, but there was a brief power outage during transit, leading 173 to kill a number of the staff transporting it. This test was still considered a step in the right direction. After 682 was once again shrunk by a different anomaly, SCP-173 was released into its chamber. At first, it appeared that 173 had actually killed 682, but a week later it returned, having reconstituted itself from matter that had been splattered on 173 after it had been brutalized, making this test, once again, a failure. Dr. Carlson requested the resources to conduct one more cross-test, but this request was denied. A member of the O5 Council affixed a request simply saying, "Stop it, Carlson, please. Stop it, Carlson, get some help. Stop it, Carlson." Document 10. Revised Entry. Oh, right. The time SCP-173 literally caused an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. In the document Revised Entry, we get a frightening glimpse into a possible future world, where SCP-173 develops a terrifying new anomalous ability, multiplication. We don't know exactly how it happened, but here, the sculpture somehow developed the ability to make exact copies of itself. And what's more, every time one of these copies is produced, the collective SCP-173 hive mind gets stronger, allowing them to think tactically and slowly wipe out North America. even destroying any potential Foundation countermeasures, then ripping and snapping through anyone or anything that dared oppose. In the end, the world decided to take the nuclear option, literally, and blow away North America with nuclear bombardment in order to stop the SCP-173 army from spreading to the rest of the world and killing everyone. However, this attempt didn't actually work, as SCP-173s were spotted in Wales over in the UK, leading to a second nuclear bombardment. It continued like this until there were no human beings left to push the big red button anymore, and only the endless legions of SCP-173 remained. There is one bright side to this otherwise pretty bleak situation though. A group of around 150 SCP-173s ganged up on SCP-682 and tore it to shreds. Somewhere out there, Dr. Carlson is probably smiling.
In June of 1985, Mark Johnson and his wife of 10 years, Sophie, were on vacation in Myrtle Beach having a great time. While they relaxed on the sand, Sophie decided to take a picture of her husband for their scrapbook. So she pulled out the Polaroid Supercolor 645 that she'd bought specifically for the trip. She pressed the button, waiting for the picture to print, pulled it out, and shook it. What she expected to see was a shot of Mark lying on his beach towel. What she got was a picture of her husband in the arms of his secretary. They say that a picture speaks 1,000 words, but this particular camera takes pictures that are worth even more than that. When developed, the pictures taken with this normal-looking Polaroid camera reveal the innermost desires of the person being photographed. Welcome to the story of SCP-978. The Desire Camera. The main reason the Foundation keeps SCP-978 under wraps is due to its use as an easy form of blackmail. All anyone with access to the camera would have to do is snap a few covert photos, and they'd have instant dirt on the world's most powerful people. To further stop this camera from falling into the wrong hands, the containment guidelines strictly forbid the use of the camera for anything other than simple documentation, and all uses of it must be thoroughly logged and checked. So, now that you know what the camera does, it's time to look at what kinds of strange and mysterious photos it's taken. After all, who doesn't want a chance to gain insight into the minds of the Foundation's most famous and dangerous inmates? First, to serve as a control, the team took a photo of a blue office chair. No change was recorded, proving that the camera didn't work on non-anomalous inanimate objects. Some of the earliest tests of the camera were the photos that the research team took of each other. One by one, the doctors and their assistants were photographed in neutral poses, smiling as if for a completely normal photo. Then they waited while the photos developed like normal Polaroids. Most of the research team had minimal changes in their photos. One was shown slouched in his chair drinking from a flask. One was shown in her civilian clothes, getting ready to go home from work. One doctor was in the exact same pose, but with a different colored tie on. The last assistant photographed, however, had their picture come out wildly different than how they were posed. Their desire revealed by the camera was so shocking that it had to be redacted, and the assistant was placed on temporary psychiatric leave. Following this first successful test, the doctor in charge of the project ordered a second round of tests to be conducted, this time on a series of D-Class personnel. A picture of one D-Class, who was photographed while eating in the cafeteria, showed up as scuba diving on vacation with his wife and child. He was allowed to keep the picture afterwards. Another had a similar result. He was photographed in a neutral pose like the members of the research team had been, and when the picture developed, the D-Class was seen holding a smiling baby, whom he identified as his 1-year-old daughter. After that, the results of the SCP-978 test started to get a little, well, weird. A notoriously twisted D-Class known as 7294 was photographed in his cell, and when the Polaroid developed, he was in the same cell playing a cello made out of a dismembered mannequin. D217-017 was a late-stage victim of SCP-217, a virus that turns organic matter into metal. You would assume that her innermost desire would be to be cured of her disease, but when she was photographed in her cell, the resulting Polaroid showed her completely made of metal, kneeling and praying at the base of a black obelisk. One D-Class, who had been rendered comatose and was on life support, was photographed in their hospital room. Their picture showed them as only a limp, deflated skin in their photo. The photograph of another D-Class, who had become increasingly listless and apathetic since their integration into the D-Class program, resulted in a picture that was exactly the same as they appeared in reality, except the light in their cell was slightly dimmer. Intrigued by these results, the research team wanted to see how the camera would react to SCP-148, a type of metal that blocks the psychic properties of other SCPs. A helmet was made from the material and placed on a D-Class who was given an adult magazine to read while his photo was taken. When the photo was developed, it was extremely blurry. Upon close analysis, the figure of the D-Class reading the magazine could still be made out, and around him the faint images of several nude people could be seen. The research team wanted to see if the results were the same when the camera was used on animals. Photos of the lab mice and rabbits showed them eating or mating in their respective Polaroids. A zebra finch was shown escaping its cage, while a guard dog and its handler were shown playing fetch in the park. When cockroaches were photographed, there was no difference visible between the picture and reality. But the most exciting test results came when the camera was tested on other SCPs. For a few of the SCPs tested, there was no visible difference between the picture and reality. This was the case for SCP-173 the Sculpture, SCP-343 nicknamed God, SCP-014, an immortal man who is, over time, being turned into concrete, and SCP-063, the world's best toothbrush. When SCP-035, better known as the Possessive Mask, was photographed in its glass case, the picture showed an unidentified individual wearing the mask, sitting on a throne and surrounded by 3 masked corpses. The team took a picture of SCP-043, a haunted copy of the White Album that was being interrogated while on a turntable. In the picture, the album was being returned to its sleeve. They then photographed SCP-049 the Plague Doctor standing in his cell. In the picture, the Plague Doctor is hugging an unidentified small child and surrounded by instances of SCP-049-2. When they took a picture of SCP-050, a mischievous statue of a monkey reading a book, the result was predictably playful, given that SCP's history of pulling pranks. The photo that came out of the camera showed the camera itself, with another picture of itself coming out of the developing slot. Microscopic analysis revealed that this recursive photography kept going until the cameras in the pictures of the other cameras were too small to see. The team next photographed SCP-053, the young girl, and the photo was taken as the young girl was drawing with crayons in her cell. In the picture, she was riding through a sunny field on the back of her friend SCP-682. SCP-053 and SCP-682 were even wearing matching bows, dresses, and pink nail polish. When they took a picture of SCP-096 the Shy Guy though, the picture showed SCP-096's cell with nothing in it. SCP-085, the living 2D sketch known as Cassie, was photographed tinkering with a drawn car. In the developed photo, Cassie was engaged in the same activity, but both she and the car were now 3-dimensional. The team took a photo of SCP-106, the Old Man, emerging from a wall within his cell. When the photo developed, it showed the old man roaming a wheat field near an old farmhouse. From the porch of the farmhouse, an older woman is greeting SCP-106 with open arms. They also took a photo of SCP-168, a sentient calculator sitting on a table in its containment cell. In the picture, a teenage boy is seen doing complex math homework using the calculator. Next to him on the table are thick textbooks with titles like Complicated Math, Difficult Math, and Math You Need Your Calculator For. The photo of SCP-261, a vending machine that dispenses snack products from alternate universes, showed the SCP in its usual hallway, almost completely buried in coins. SCP-507, an otherwise normal man who unwillingly teleports between dimensions, was photographed while eating in the cafeteria. The developed picture showed him dressed as a Foundation researcher talking to other researchers. When SCP-682 was photographed, floating in its containment tank, the resulting picture showed the SCP surrounded by the corpses of all of the Foundation staff and mauling the person who had taken the photo. A researcher's note accompanying this photo reads, "Well, that was predictable." Yes, it was. Just for the fun of it, the team also tested the camera's effects on a few other Foundation personnel. They took a photo of Dr. Bright while he was arguing with Dr. Clef. The picture that came out showed a tombstone engraved with the words, "Jack Bright, resting at last." The team also took a photo of Dr. Clef as he stormed out in a huff following the argument. Given that Clef's face cannot be photographed, they were curious as to what the results would be. The picture showed little difference compared to reality, save for the fact that Clef's head was replaced by an image of a hand making a rude gesture. Upon closer examination of the photo, the team also realized that there was a young girl in the background who, strangely, had cloven hooves instead of feet. A young SCP-166 perhaps. The team then took a photo of Dr. Fisher holding his pet hamster. Contrary to expectations, the picture revealed not Dr. Fisher's desires, but the hamster's, showing the hamster sleeping peacefully in its cage, with Dr. Fisher nowhere to be seen. As you can see from these test logs, the effects of the camera are, well, inconsistent, with some photos showing very immediate, simple whims, and others showing the subject's deepest and most secret desires. While the researchers working with SCP-978 seemed like they had a lot of fun getting to peek into the minds of all their coworkers and test subjects, there's no telling what kind of pandemonium could be unleashed if someone on the outside ever got a chance to use it. Thankfully, the camera, which has been classified as safe for obvious reasons, is kept securely in security locker HJ12 at Site-17, which means none of us have to worry about our own pictures taken by the Desire camera leaking out. But if someone did get the camera out and took your picture, what do you think they'd see? History is often the greatest teacher. By looking at the past, we can learn from it with the benefit of hindsight, such as in the early 20th century, when the entire planet was in the grip of a horrifying war. At the time, this conflict was often referred to as the Great War, although there was little great about it. Others knew it as the war to end all wars, the largest armed engagement the world had known, although it would not be the last. Today, with that hindsight we just mentioned, we know it as World War I. In June 1914, an Archduke of Austria was shot dead by a Serbian assassin, and as a result of the complicated treaties forged between various nations, soon much of the world was involved in the war that started out as little more than a scuffle between neighbors. The horrors of trench warfare, the carnage caused by the earliest chemical weapons and armored tanks, left a permanent and lasting scar on the world's history, one still mourned and remembered to this day. The advances in chemical and mechanized warfare that took place during World War I range from the use of chemicals like tear gas used to disable targets, to more lethal compounds like mustard gas. And of course, this was the first war to introduce tanks to the battlefield. Although these were clumsy and cumbersome to begin with, it was arguably the advent of the First World War that forced many advancements in armored warfare. It was the belief of many individuals on all sides that if the Great War was made too gruesome and horrific to continue, it would come to its natural end. This, of course, did not happen, only encouraging each participant of World War I to continue advancing their weaponry. But what if there were weapons developed during World War I that were too dangerous to be deployed? With every side looking for advantage over their adversaries, what if some turned to the unethical, even the anomalous, to gain the upper hand in the war? Introducing SCP-186, otherwise known as To End All Wars. Try to imagine weaponry that was so incredibly advanced for the mid-1910s, yet so horribly and unjustifiably cruel. Worse than gas that can cause blisters to form not only on the skin but also inside the lungs. More advanced than armored vehicles with mounted machine guns crawling across no man's land. It's hard to picture something that could be more devastating than that, especially for the time period. But a good measure of a weapon's destructive power is usually found in the damage it leaves in its wake. In this case, SCP-186 is exactly that. Not the anomalous weapons themselves, but the site of a battle that took place between the 24th of July and the 13th of August in 1917. The event became known as the Battle of Husiaton Woods, but you won't find any mention of it in the history books. Any and all records of the battle had been secretly expunged by the SCP Foundation, and their own archive is now the only place where someone can find the details of what happened over those few weeks.
The engagement took place between the German Imperial Army and forces belonging to Russia's provisional government, a small skirmish in comparison to the enormity of many battles of the First World War. So what happened at the Battle of Sentient Woods to make it so horrible that it had to be stricken from the historical record? For that, we have to go back to Sentient, a small settlement in western Ukraine. In July of 1917, the surviving remnants of a Russian division had been scattered. The Germans counterattacked against the Kerensky offensive had driven the Russian troops to the dense forest that surrounded the town of Sentient. You might be forgiven for thinking that the outnumbered Russian force was decimated by almost 500 German soldiers pursuing them, but you would be very, very wrong. As the opposing forces met, they engaged each other in a fearsome battle, but this was unlike any encounter that had taken place over the course of World War I, or ever would again. Both sides were armed with anomalous weaponry, possessing technology beyond any that had ever been seen at the time. To this day, the SCP Foundation has been baffled by these weapons. Even with their unique understanding of the anomalous, Foundation researchers had been unable to replicate any of them, and instead keeps them secured in the munitions wing of Site-23, all under the designation of SCP-186-1. Among the recovered instances of SCP-186-1 is a highly modified Skoda M1909 machine gun. However, rather than behaving like a standard firearm, this gun would cause rapid-forming growths, not unlike tumors, to appear within the body of its targets. Another was concertina wire, a form of spiraled razor wire commonly used in trenches. Only this wire was coated in an unknown compound that caused permanent hallucination whenever the wire cut a person and allowed the hallucinogen to enter their bloodstream. A number of rifle cartridges were also found littered around SCP-186. Sounds pretty normal for a First World War battlefield, right? Except these cartridges were not filled with gunpowder like you would expect them to be. Instead, they inexplicably contained human bone, ground into powder. The purpose of this ammunition or how it was manufactured is still unknown to the SCP Foundation. As if a gun that causes tumors and hallucination-triggering wire weren't bad enough, Foundation researchers also found a number of grenades used by the troops at the site of SCP-186. These were British Empire Standard Issue No. 27 grenades, but they contained a unique, anomalous gas that was capable of passing through any and all filters. Gas masks were developed during World War I to protect soldiers from mustard and tear gas on the battlefield, but these masks only offered basic filtration by today's standards. Even so, the gas contained in these grenades was strong enough to negate any and all filtration systems, but that was far from its worst quality. Did this unknown gas choke troops? Not quite. Did it disable them like tear gas? In a way, yes. But this gas did so by making any soldier exposed to it experience the sensation of having their bodies set on fire, constantly. Also recovered at SCP-186 were the remains of some form of explosive, and it is believed by the Foundation that it was detonated at the culmination of the Battle of Sentient Woods, causing approximately a third of the battle's total casualties. Foundation researchers estimate that almost 300 civilians were either caught in the blast or died as a result of the crossfire between the German and Russian forces. The soldiers involved were also all permanently incapacitated or killed, or at least, almost all of them. So where did these anomalous weapons come from? And why were they used just in this battle, not throughout the First World War? According to records kept from the public by the SCP Foundation, the German troops in the Sentient Woods were accompanied by a Hungarian advisor to their military named Matthias Nemes. Under his orders, they specifically targeted and tracked the Russian division that was retreating from them, who were similarly accompanying a French scientist, Dr. Jean Durand. It was these two men, Nemes and Durand, who were responsible for arming the Germans and Russians with their arsenals of anomalous weapons. They had ensured that their inventions of death had only received limited manufacturing, and had intentionally joined opposing sides of the war effort to test their creations in real combat. In other words, it appears that Durand and Nemes has been working together since the beginning of the war. and the troops they were with had been manipulated into taking part in a big test. These soldiers were just as unlucky as the civilians caught in the crossfire. Today, the SCP Foundation has established an automated security perimeter around the site of SCP-186, preventing access to anyone unless authorized. Everything within the perimeter is frequently patrolled and observed by security personnel. Why the need for so much security at an old battleground? Given the damage caused by the use of so many anomalous weapons, including those that the Foundation was unable to recover, the area of SCP-186 has become a hotspot for unusual happenings, even long after the Battle of Houston Woods ended. These anomalies include abnormal environmental or weather conditions. For example, all the trees in the southwestern portion of the former battlefield died and decomposed at an accelerated rate in 1923, while the temperature dropped to a permanent -15 degrees Celsius 4 years later. But yet there was never any snowfall. Then there were the sounds of gunfire in 1932, despite there being nobody inside the SCP-186 site. A number of years later, a pair of Foundation agents disappeared on a routine patrol of the area and were never seen again. Of course, 23 years after the end of the war to end all wars, the world was plunged into chaos and found itself at war once again. During this time, SCP Foundation personnel were instructed to evacuate the site of SCP-186, based on intelligence from their allied operatives who were working undercover inside the Third Reich. As the Foundation disembarked their observation posts, a faint glow was visible coming from SCP-186. 4 years passed, and the Second World War came to a close. The Foundation returned to re-establish their containment of SCP-186, and immediately discovered 13 corpses dressed in German Army uniforms, bearing the insignia of the 4th Panzer Army. There were a further 27 bodies of soldiers wearing the garb of the Soviet 22nd Army. Both sets of bodies had already begun decaying, although someone had removed the dog tags and anything else that could identify these dead troops. It seems that history had, to some extent, repeated itself, as the Nazi and Soviet forces had clashed on the same battlefield where their German and Russian predecessors had fought during the Battle of Houston Woods. Years later, in 1959, a large sinkhole formed in the northeast portion of SCP-186. 4 men were found wandering nearby, all extremely disoriented, wearing decomposing military uniforms. Were they lost survivors of the Nazi-Soviet battle? No. These men were in World War I uniforms, German Empire and Russian Standard Issue. They had survived the Battle of Houston Woods and were somehow still standing, even though they should have died during the First World War. How did these troops manage this? Well, the final anomalous weapon recovered at the site of SCP-186 were mortar shells, but unsurprisingly, these weren't your standard high-explosive artillery. Much like those grenades mentioned earlier, these mortar shells contained a unique, previously unseen gas. But instead of causing the perpetual pain of being on fire, this gas altered the biology of animal cells that it came into contact with. Somehow, it triggered a change that prevented a body's cells from ceasing life function, keeping them continuously operational. In other words, it meant that any soldiers exposed to this gas simply could not die. That's right. Some of the troops involved in the Battle of Houston Woods are still alive to this day. The SCP Foundation immediately began excavating the sinkhole and discovered 23 bodies buried beneath in a mass grave. There were more of the surviving World War I soldiers, kept alive for decades by the mortar gas. Some of them still had infected wounds and battlefield injuries that should have killed them, yet their bodies refused to die. The soldiers were rounded up and hauled off to Site 23, where the Foundation researchers began assessing them. However, they were unable to glean any useful information from the German and Russian troops that had been unearthed. All of the soldiers exhibited symptoms of extensive psychological trauma and had developed various mental disorders while buried alive under the battlefield. They had all been driven to insanity, perhaps as a result of their unnaturally extended lifespans, maybe from being buried underground and unable to die for so long. Or perhaps it was the wartime atrocities they witnessed that drove the soldiers over the brink. History is a great teacher, but those willing to forget its mistakes are often doomed to repeat them. Matthias Nemes and Dr. Jean Durand created the anomalous weapons responsible for SCP-186, and similar minds would later go on to build the atomic bomb and countless weapons of mass destruction after. World wars, the suffering of countless troops and civilians. These parts of history mean nothing if we don't allow ourselves to learn from them. And maybe that's our curse as a species, that we are doomed to fight the war to end all wars again and again and again.
Guten Nachmittag, Freunde. Welcome back to SCP Explained. World War II is one of the most tragic periods of recent history, and perhaps the defining event of the 20th century. And not only was this conflict a horrifying atrocity that led to the deaths of 75 million soldiers and civilians, it was also a time of immense weirdness. The American military created the Ghost Army, a tactical deception unit that used tactics as crazy as inflatable tanks and wooden airfields to distract and confuse the Axis powers. They also temporarily renamed hamburgers Liberty Steaks in some places in order to avoid the German connotations of the original name. The Polish military even gave an actual bear the rank of corporal, and this bear, named Corporal Wojtek, became a decorated military hero. But enough about SCP-5464. We've got bigger fish, or, well, bears, to fry. One party in this war had more than their fair share of alleged World War II weirdness: the Germans. Nazi scientists were performing horrifying and nonsensical experiments, from medical experiments on prisoners to attempt to create large and ridiculous weapons known as Wunderwaffe. One of Hitler's right-hand men, Heinrich Himmler, took up residence in a castle where he and his men allegedly performed odd occult rituals, and even the Lebensborn, a deranged eugenics experiment intended to produce a huge stock of Aryan children from SS member fathers. And if all of that seems certifiably insane, which for the record, it is, then the stuff the SCP Foundation has been suppressing will make your toes curl. We've already covered the fact that even Hitler himself, copied by Stalin with the help of Sarkic wizards, is now classified as SCP-2430 and held in containment by the Foundation. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. We can thank a shady group known as the Obscura Corps for the creation or utilization of a lot of these artifacts and entities. As we discussed in our video on the immortal Hitler clone, the Obscura Corps was Nazi Germany's answer to the SCP Foundation, though their highly unethical methods were much more like a racist version of the Chaos Insurgency. This group of loyal occult thugs was charged with hunting down any anomalous artifacts that would give Germany the edge it needed in the war effort. Think the kind of guys going after the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail while trying to kill Indiana Jones. Of course, seeing as Germany still lost the war in the end, they weren't exactly the best at their job. But that doesn't mean they don't have a long list of bizarre and often dangerous anomalies to their name. Starting with SCP-2367. This is a device so infamous that not even the SCP Foundation has been able to fully suppress knowledge of its existence. Popularly known as Die Glocke, meaning the bell in German, this device has been a popular staple among time travel and alien conspiracy theorists. And those theorists honestly aren't that far from the truth. The bell is a spatial and temporal transportation device created by the Germans during World War II in hopes of teleporting spies, soldiers, and equipment behind enemy lines. And terrifyingly, the machine actually worked and was able to transport multiple SS officers. However, there is one detail that makes Die Glocke a little less terrifying. Everything they transport materializes several hundred feet over the top of their intended destinations. In the case of all transported SS officers, this means that they appeared high in the air and immediately fell to their doom like Wile E. Coyote. SS officers hitting the ground at incredibly high speeds is always a delightful mental image. As funny and incompetent as this is, there is actually one major threat posed by SCP-2367. The SCP Foundation raided a number of Obscura strongholds during World War II as a part of an operation called Operation Hammer. During one of their raids, a large group of around 1,400 German soldiers, along with a huge number of large vehicles and pieces of military equipment, fled via Die Glocke. They all disappeared through the teleporter, and according to all Foundation estimates, they're likely to manifest again in 2031. They'll rain down from the sky near Berlin, crushing everything below under the weight of their own vehicles and bodies. A mobile task force, nicknamed Himmler's Housekeepers, has been mobilized to clear the area and reduce all possible civilian fatalities when this happens. German engineering at its finest, right? But hey, let's give those mad Nazi inventors another chance to prove themselves with a second, even bigger Wunderwaffe designed by Albert Speer, German Minister of Armaments and War Production under Adolf Hitler. It's SCP-044, the biggest artillery weapon ever created. It's a ginormous cannon, 251,000 kilograms or 251 metric tons in weight, and so huge that it required 2 freight locomotives at the same time to transport it. The Nazis were big fans of absurdly huge weapons, whether they were cannons, giant planes, or the world's heaviest tanks, almost as though they were compensating for something. But there is one thing that makes 044 special to the point of being anomalous. It can fire literally anything. When something is placed inside the firing chamber of SCP-044, the weapon will transform into a powerful explosive payload, with its explosive power being proportional to the size of the objects placed inside. Even crowds of people could be transformed into deadly explosive rounds. One of the largest objects that the Foundation fired off was the Administrator's diesel pickup truck, weighing 8,900 kilograms. How on earth did the Nazis ever lose with a weapon like this on their side, right? Well, much like so many of their other weapons, it was a victim of their own greed. Weapons this big just couldn't be moved practically, and were easily routed by less powerful but more maneuverable Allied weapons. Next, we have another anomalous Nazi failure, though this one was intended to give life rather than take it for once. The anomaly in question is SCP-2936. A secret Nazi military and research base hidden in the cold reaches of Antarctica. The place has likely been abandoned by humans since the 1950s, but there is one entity that still rolls through the halls on rumbling caterpillar tracks. An advanced sentient robot nicknamed the Stahlmutter, or Steel Mother, powered by a mysterious power source shaped like an ambiguous glowing symbol on its chest. Who would have guessed that the Nazi design sensibility was tacky? The Stahlmutter is there to maintain the Glasgerbarmotren, or glass wombs, where a number of desiccated human fetuses are held. The intention of this base was clear. Much like the Lebensborn project we mentioned at the start of the video, this was a controlled breeding program supported by the Nazis' deranged philosophy of eugenics. But after the war, when the Nazis attending the base presumably fled for their lives, there was some kind of accident that destroyed the seal of the glass wombs, allowing the amniotic fluid to leak out and killing the fetuses inside. But due to a malfunction, the Stahlmutter's diagnostics were way off, and it never realized that its mission was futile. When researchers attempted to inform the machine of that fact, it simply replied,
"The kinder lie on the bottoms of the Glasgerbarmotren. They are unmoving like the dead soldiers, but the kinder are not soldiers, and the kinder are not under mission. And the chemical, physical, and mechanical parameters of the Glasgerbarmotren are all at optimal values. Therefore the kinder are not dead. The Stahlmutter loves the kinder always. Good kinder will grow strong and brave and wise. The Stahlmutter loves the good kinder."
The next anomaly wasn't created by the Germans or the Obscura, but it was utilized by them. It's SCP-3457, a collection of strange rituals, artifacts, and workings known as the Rites of Solomon. If the correct artifacts are collected and the rites are performed, the executors of the ritual have the ability to control the distribution of magic or thaumaturgy across the globe. It's Obscura's plan to perform the rite and remove the ability to perform thaumaturgy from anyone who wasn't of Germanic descent, giving them German magic supremacy. This was the end of the infamous Seventh Occult War, which was the major geopolitical event that led to the formation of the Global Occult Coalition, coinciding roughly with what we civilians consider World War II. Luckily, through a collaboration between the SCP Foundation and the precursor to the Global Occult Coalition, the Allied Occult Coalition, Obscura was defeated before they could complete the ritual and grant magical supremacy for the fatherland. Since the defeat of Obscura in this pivotal battle,
organizations like the SCP Foundation, the GOC, and others have sworn to keep the different artifacts necessary to perform the Rites of Solomon safe and secure. Some are kept in public museums as part of a global sting operation to catch remaining members of Obscura, who hope to someday attempt the dark ritual again. Some of the items remain in the hands of scattered Obscura remnants to this day. Okay, so arcane historical rites are a little complicated. Let's hop back to another wacky Wunderwaffe to cleanse our palate. Something like SCP-3721. Remember when we said the Germans were kind of obsessed with having the biggest, gaudiest guns back during World War II? They were also apparently ahead of their time in this regard, as in 1943, they were able to construct a fully operational orbital cannon and an earthbound computer bank that allowed them to operate its strikes remotely. But even scarier than a giant orbital cannon controlled by the Nazis is a giant orbital cannon that's completely out of control. That's right. The computer on the ground is autonomous and decides the best time to make its strikes by monitoring news broadcasts of current events. So if you feel like a day full of bad news is unpleasant, just be grateful that it wasn't the day that activated the massive death satellite looming up above. Maybe the idea of land being bombarded by an orbital cannon freaks you out a little. Understandable, really. Maybe you'd prefer to flee to the water for safety, but you're not safe from the Germans there either. And we're not talking about them stealing your beach chairs while you're going for a swim. We're talking about SCP-4217, which was once known as the Bismarck, which was a German World War II battleship before it was appropriated by a giant cephalopod that not only has giant dangerous tentacles, but also has the ability to use all of the ship's weapons against you too. What will you think of next, Germany? And finally, perhaps the strangest Obscura Wunderwaffe of all, a dangerous semantic weapon known as SCP-3878. It's a deadly word-based infectious cognitohazard created in a single patient zero via a strict regimen of psychotropic drugs, electroconvulsive therapy, and at the conclusion of the program, trepanation to create an extremely strong anti-concept within the subject's mind. When this person is activated with a trigger stimuli, this will begin to spread the cognitohazard, causing a lethal effect to anyone who doesn't speak the subject's native language fluently. The first infectee would have been German if the plan came to fruition, so all but fluent German speakers would have been killed by the infection. It's a solid plan, by which we mean a Metal Gear Solid plan. Incidentally, killing the victims of this cognitohazard was never actually the plan. They just hoped to erase other languages. Though given that the Nazis weren't exactly people of high moral fiber, we'd be willing to bet that they were probably a-okay with killing anyone who wasn't a fluent speaker of German anyway. And there you have it. A taster plate of the wackiest Wunderwaffe and the sinister soldiers and scientists who made them a reality, or at least tried to twist them to their own gain. It's honestly lucky for all of us that the Nazis during World War II were a gang of arrogant and incompetent buffoons, because if that weren't the case, we'd probably be speaking German right now. Though if you'd like to live on the bright side, at least we'd be safe from SCP-3878. When you think of the SCP Foundation, you probably think of the organization being primarily based in the United States. After all, many of the anomalies we cover here on SCP Explained happen to take place in America, so it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. The fact of the matter is that the anomalous is not just confined to the United States, and if it were, the Foundation would have a much easier time doing its job than it actually does. Unfortunately for the Foundation, it's not just the US that they have to focus their efforts on, it's the entire world. That's right, no matter where you are on Earth, no matter how far you travel, the threat of being the victim of an unsuspecting anomalous incident remains the same, even on your family vacation to Disney World. Of course, the Foundation's mission is massively expansive too, with each object requiring not only significant resources to capture, but even more to effectively contain and study over a long period of time. And then you have the utilities of each site, keeping the power on and the water running. Or what about actually paying the hardworking SCP personnel who put their lives on the line every day? How about keeping global reconnaissance as a watchful eye in case of talk of any unnatural incidents start making the rounds in the ordinary world? What about maintaining a standing army of trained task force operatives, far deadlier than any other military force on the planet? resources to cover up events as soon as they happen, field agents, database expenses. It's unimaginable to think of the costs of operating the Foundation in one country, let alone on a global scale. So how do they manage this heavy responsibility? How does the SCP Foundation divide up its resources accordingly, as well as raise enough money to continue operating? Think about it. If you were an organization having to cover the entire globe in service of protecting humanity from the anomalous, what would be the best way of managing your resources? First, you need to make sure you are backed by the richest of the rich, who could use some of their personal wealth to fund your goals. Well, that's the Overseer Council, the group at the top of the Foundation composed of some of the most affluent and wealthy individuals in the world. Second, you'd make sure you had a means of generating revenue. The Foundation can't exactly open itself for donations from the public, and it can't issue taxes, but it can have others do that for them. Cover-up businesses in sourcing funding from the governments of the world, either legitimately or through blackmailing, are two surefire ways to keep the cash flowing endlessly. Who knows how many Fortune 500 companies are actually owned by the Foundation? There's a lot of money in the world to go around, but someone needs to capitalize on it in order to get it. But the most important way to manage global resources is decentralization. Remember what we said about the perception of the Foundation being US-based? Well, it is true that the Foundation has its origins in the United States, and the country is the center of a large number of containment efforts. But the English-speaking branch of the Foundation is far from the only one. Allow us to introduce international branches, or -INT for short. The Foundation likes to codify its various branches based on the majority language spoken there. So the English-speaking branch would cover nations such as the United States, Canada, and parts of Europe, while in regions where Chinese is spoken, the Chinese branch presides over the territory. Truly, the containment of the anomalous is a global effort, with at least one Foundation site located in each country: Africa, India, Japan, Latin America. There isn't a part of the world that the Foundation doesn't have covered, and for good reason too. Anomalous objects can be discovered anywhere and everywhere. Having locations near all major population centers isn't just a luxury of having unlimited funding. It is the very thing that necessitates such funding. And with international branches adhering to their own policies, holding their own personnel, and speaking their own languages, it should come as no surprise that they have their own database of SCP objects too. That's right, each branch has an archive of files of their own, written based on objects contained in their respective country. Imagine being the guy who's just finishing reading all of the files currently existing in the English database, when you realize then you have to drudge through several more databases filled with thousands upon thousands of files just to be the completionist your heart wants you to be. It is a time-consuming task, but that's what we're here for. And today we're going to boost your own international database with coverage of SCP-007-INT, an anomaly sourced from the Foundation's global database. It all started in Massa Rosa, Italy, a medium-sized town located just outside Pisa. It's not famous for much, well outside of hosting the annual Massa Rosa International Piano Competition, which we should remind you that we're all very excited about this year considering Dr. Clef himself has decided he'd enter. But enough about Agent Ukulele's wild pianist skills. Let's get back to the story at hand. A contingent of mobile task force operatives sourced from a squad dubbed Smoking Anomalous Snakes, who belong to the Foundation's Italian branch, were stationed in the town for the past week. Given that Massa Rosa is smaller than the average city, with a population numbering just over 22,000, these operatives had to take extra precaution as to not give away their presence. In a town where everyone knows everyone, a gaggle of unfamiliar faces making their way through could set off proverbial alarms in the local population. The Foundation operatives were there for a single purpose: to source the production of anomalous weaponry rumored to be occurring throughout the region. Now, why is this a problem in the first place? As technology advances, war changes along with it, sometimes necessitating the need for more efficient weapons and inspiring their development. Spears to deal with the invading tribes on land, horses and chariots to rush those with spears, bows and arrows to combat horses. War has always made use of new technology to make combat more efficient and deadly. and anomalous weaponry is no different. After all, not every paranormal organization holds the same ethos as the Foundation's secure, contain, protect mentality. There are many groups of interest, such as the dreaded Chaos Insurgency, or the Foundation's greatest rival, the Global Occult Coalition, that would be more than happy to utilize research into the anomalous for military purposes. And who can blame them? With anomalous weaponry, situations can be resolved, and enemies eradicated easier and deadlier than ever before. Up against a world that doesn't abide by their mission, even the Foundation is forced to utilize anomalous weaponry, albeit on a much smaller scale. Take Task Force Alpha 9 Last Hope, a squad made up entirely of SCP objects, such as SCP-105, Iris Thompson, and SCP-4494, the world's greatest arbiter of vigilante justice, otherwise known as the Spectre. Even mobile task forces, such as Samsara, a group of heavily augmented cybernetic super soldiers, make use of anomalous weaponry to further advance their efficiency on the field. After all, task forces spend their time combating anomalies in the field. It only makes sense to fight fire with fire, so to speak. Third-party sellers and producers of anomalous weaponry often provide the technology to establish groups of interest, so the Foundation getting the jump on a distribution center in Massa Rosa, Italy was a strategic move on the part of the Foundation. They weren't sure of the exact details, but their sources tipped them off about a gang of fascist neo-Nazis in the area, working on supplying anomalous weaponry to the criminal underworld. It's bad enough that the trigger-happy radicals at the Chaos Insurgency have access to anomalous means of destruction. Imagine if every 2-bit gangster and minor criminal had their hands on something as deadly as an SCP object, and they could acquire even more powerful equipment if they wanted. If the fascists made their money, who knows where their anomalous weaponry would wind up? The Foundation wasn't sure what they were manufacturing, but they were positive that it wasn't good. Their source explicitly described it as a weapon that could change the course of war as they understood it. A living, breathing shield. Naturally, the Foundation was just as interested in potentially finding a purpose for this mystery weapon as they were in taking it out of the hands of the black market suppliers. What uses could it hold in the field? Could it provide an extra layer of protection for the Foundation operatives? The operatives were compiled from a vanguard and reconnaissance team, and were the only ones the resource-strained Italian branch had available for the job. They spent days combing through the town until they stumbled upon what they believed to be a hideout for the gang. While attempting to investigate, a mysterious man ran out in front of the team, darting towards them from across the street. The team went to shoot, but hesitated after realizing that the man was accompanied by a mysterious silver balloon-like entity ominously floating above his shoulder. Not only that, but he was wearing a full suit of protective equipment, almost like a beekeeper's suit. The operatives opened fire at the unidentified target, but before their bullets could make contact, the silver balloon began bubbling and spread itself across the man's body like a protective sheet. It was then they knew they found their living shield. The bullet slid right off the man, hitting the liquid covering him and immediately being negated by its anomalous properties. Then, before the team could react, the liquid shot forward, detaching from the man's body and latching onto a Foundation operative. The silver gel began to writhe and constrict, attempting to absorb the operative through his protective gear. In a quick executive decision, the team lead made the choice to put the operative, who was in the midst of being absorbed by the gel, out of his misery. After all, they couldn't take risks when dealing with an unknown anomaly, especially one that they already knew was being utilized as a deadly weapon. As soon as the body dropped dead, both the liquid and the gang member took off through the streets, and the Foundation gave pursuit. The Foundation chased the man through the narrow maze-like streets of the town, with the silver liquid tailing after them and attempting to absorb even more operatives. Thankfully, the gel wasn't fast. The man, however, was another story. The operatives chased and chased, indiscriminately unloading a salvo of bullets into the general area. A few struck, puncturing the man's skin and causing him to bleed. Following the trail of blood, the Foundation was able to corner him into a street alley. But then, all of a sudden, the gel burst through the concrete wall the man was backed up against, the anomaly now larger than ever. The goo reconnected with the man, shielding him from the Foundation's firepower and allowing him to run away and escape. The Foundation briefly retreated and reconvened with their superiors to try to find the best strategy to move forward. They then took to the streets again, searching for the man and any trace of the anomaly. They found bits of the liquid strewn through the streets, squirming and writhing. Unlike the first batch, these bits were able to be neutralized via regular bullets. Their search eventually bore fruit, and they found the man patching himself up in a nearby cellar. He had a briefcase, and the area around him seemed to be a type of laboratory. Still, they were unable to find the silver balloon anomaly. The operatives, with weapons drawn, attempted to speak with the man, but he lashed out and shot at them, prompting them to shoot back, immediately killing him. They weren't able to get much information from him, but it was an act of self-defense. The Foundation, now with their only source of information gone, resorted to looking through the rest of the basement. They found a series of documents held inside the room, all written in Italian. They also found a tunnel leading outside the town and a small cart that was intended to be used to transport cylinders containing the silver liquid out of Massa Rosa. The Foundation was very quick to stop this anomaly from getting out on the black market, as it seemed like this was a distribution and testing center. But with the man dead and the gel contained, they realized their mission was complete and collected all remaining documents and traces of the silver liquid anomaly. In a joint effort between the Italian and Lusophone branches, the liquid was transported to Brazil for further research and classified as SCP-007-INT. The Lusophone branch's Board of Superintendents had made the decision earlier that SCP-007-INT held historical and research significance for the two branches, as some of the task force members that aided in the capture of the anomaly were sourced from Brazil. The documents were shared between both branches, and chemical research on the object was conducted. Immediately, the Foundation discovered the reason why the liquid responded so quickly to the man who was distributing it, and why it works perfectly as a living shield. SCP-007-INT is sentient and capable of recognizing patterns and portraying emotion, albeit to small degrees. Research into SCP-007-INT's composition and responses to stimuli in a lab environment continued, but one researcher from the Italian branch noted that this wasn't the first time they had encountered an anomaly like this. When dealing with a group of organizations known as the Fascist Council of the Occult, the Foundation discovered a heavily redacted and secret anomalous weapon with certain properties similar to SCP-007-INT. While the details of this weapon were lost to the database and above our clearance level, we can assume that due to the Nazi connection between the man distributing the liquid and the Fascist Council of the Occult, that portions of SCP-007-INT managed to make their way to the black market and proliferate the criminal underworld. But when all the research was said and done, what was SCP-007-INT? The studies were conducted as a joint operation between the two branches, and as a result, allowed for a significant amount of testing. Researchers found that the gel was adaptable, durable, and intelligent to a certain degree, but they also discovered that their data was incredibly similar to another anomaly in their database, recorded by the Lusophone branch's predecessor, the Scientific Academy of the Anomalous. You see, the Foundation hasn't been around forever. Before it, the anomalous containment world was decentralized and composed of tinier organizations, and this was one of them. As it turns out, this organization recorded data remarkably similar to SCP-007-INT, but the details of the research was lost due to an incident involving rogue agents defecting from the organization. Think the Chaos Insurgency, but before them too. The two instances of the anomaly were apparently a perfect match to SCP-007-INT, and the two branches had both contained the same anomaly across decades, without being aware that the other had done it. While the documents were lost when defecting agents broke away from the Academy, researchers theorized that they either defected into or sold information about the anomaly to the Fascist Council, who were able to improve the liquid and turn it into a formidable military-grade weapon. Still, the experiments with SCP-007-INT proved to be a success. The anomaly's sapience allowed it to form a bond with its host, protecting and showing the desire to comfort them if need be. What a nice little hunk of deadly gunk, right? But then, just as the branches were about to give up on finding the Academy's old documentation for SCP-007-INT, they happened to discover it. The anomaly was given the codename Project Mel. This initial research found that the anomaly was incredibly adaptive, as seen below. Instance Alpha is the most belligerent case of SCP-007-INT. It prefers being involved in combat-oriented exercises and watching martial performances. Alpha has demonstrated a certain degree of infatuation to the party with, in its conception, the best performance by using its pseudopods in attempts to imitate some executed movements for the respective party to see. Instance Beta is an exemplary case of personality. I've witnessed Beta abducting a stuffed penguin, irresponsibly given by one of its operators, to demonstrate affection. Beta also displayed excitement when presented with pictures of penguins. An extraordinary situation involving Beta happened when it parted itself. Its copy assumed the form of a penguin, which Beta proceeded to care for in the likeness of an animal companion. Beta protected and guided the copy through the training course until the spontaneous expiration thereof. Instance Gamma possesses a particularly high physical intelligence. It is expressly competent in solving movement-related problematics, such as obstacle courses involving the manipulation of sensitive objects, and complex movement and transformation patterns. Interestingly, Gamma has been seen reacting to music by dancing to the respective rhythm. This original documentation proved to be valuable to the Foundation, as it provided further information on what occurred when SCP-007-INT was stolen from its original location and placed into the hands of the Fascist Council. On December 25, 1972, several security breaches across the Academy occurred, as sleeper agents of the Council stole various anomalous assets from storehouses and vaults across the country. For 2 hours, the group of 6 rogue individuals took what they could, smuggling the objects away from the organization for the purposes of using and selling them to the highest bidder. Objects stolen included Project Mel, several prototype prosthetics, and various other pieces of high-security Academy documentation. The Foundation also discovered that these sleeper agents within the Academy were students, researchers, and operatives who had been working with the organization for years, sometimes decades. Given their history, it's possible that they may have been coerced rather than them being outright agents of the Fascist Council of the Occult. Unfortunately, all of them expired during the interrogation procedures, and only one survived, captured by the Academy via suspended animation, though their whereabouts in the present day are unknown. It's unknown if the Foundation has seen the last of SCP-007-INT, or if samples of the deadly adaptive shield are still lurking in the anomalous criminal underworld. Regardless, whoever possesses SCP-007-INT is surely to be a formidable force for anyone to go up against.
The booming steps echoed through the museum corridors. Pharaohs, emperors, and Mongolian war leaders all stood stock still as the terrified security guard ran between them. Roger Pascal swung his flashlight this way and that. The light glinted on the polished steel of ancient weaponry, muskets, scimitars, and cannons. Exhibit after exhibit flashed past him as he ran through the dark museum. There was no way it was real. No possible way. He was having a bad dream. That's all it was. A bad dream. The shaking ground under his feet and the marching rhythm of the impossibly heavy footsteps behind him told him that it was real, all right. It had just been a normal shift like any other, just a regular night at the museum. Roger had been sipping his coffee and listening to the radio when all of a sudden he felt his chair start rumbling beneath him. He put his coffee down on the table and watched as it recoiled as the footsteps grew louder and closer. He got up to investigate and couldn't believe what he'd walked in on. Skidding around the corner, he tumbled into a medieval suit of armor and sent it crashing across the floor. Chainmail helmet, gauntlets, all of it rattled and crashed to the marble floor, echoing all through the museum. Then there was a sudden deathly silence as the footsteps stopped. Roger didn't breathe. Then they started again, heading straight towards him. It was all Roger could do to lie on his back in front of the giant taxidermy eagle and point his flashlight at the door as the monstrous figure of the stone soldier walked around the corner, musket in hand. Woodstock, Vermont, 1995. It was a normal day just like any other. The birds were singing in the trees and there was a gentle breeze blowing through. Nothing at all out of the ordinary. Except, of course, the statue that opened its eyes. The Civil War Memorial had been a staple of Woodstock for well over 100 years. A plinth sitting in the middle of a park with a young soldier on top of it, holding a musket peacefully by his side. The statue had watched over the town generation after generation, except now its watching had become a little more active. It took several hours for anyone to notice. Dog walkers went past listening to their Walkmans. A banker sat on a bench opposite, deep in conversation on a giant brick phone. It was only when a young child running after her football looked up at the statue and saw it looking back at her that things changed. The girl's parents didn't listen to her, of course. Parents rarely do. But word quickly went around the girl's school. Most of the time, the statue was totally still, no movement in the eyes at all. But on occasion, when a group of kids gathered around it and talked to it enough, the statue seemed to look down at them as if it was listening. But that was it. No grown-ups were particularly interested in what the children were saying, and even a lot of the children who saw it went home, concluding that they must have been imagining things. So 6 months went by without anyone really paying the statue much attention. That was until it fired its gun. In a quiet rural town, everyone hears a gunshot, but for a long time no one could work out where it had come from. Police gathered around the park, searching all around where the weapon had been heard. The only clue they could find was a small hole in the wall of a shop across the street. A couple of officers joked that the shot must have come from the statue itself. Everyone laughed it off, except for a couple of the school kids who were playing nearby. Less than 2 weeks later, another shot rang out in the middle of the night, and a group of confused police officers rushed to the park to investigate what had happened. The only thing they found was a dead bird lying on the sidewalk, shot to death. Again, the jokes went around the department that it must have been the statue who did it. Except this time, the officers were all laughing a little less enthusiastically. Without much crime going on in Woodstock, Vermont, the department decided to take the shooting quite seriously, going so far as to perform an autopsy on the dead pigeon. But when they cut the animal open and looked at the wound inside its chest, they were filled with even more confusion than they were before. It wasn't a conventional bullet lodged into the bird's ribcage at all. It was perfectly round and made of what appeared to be stone. But the next shot that rang out from the memorial park was unmistakable. It was a weekend in the middle of the summer vacation, so the park was full of families all sitting around having picnics, barbecues, and staring up at the sky watching the birds circle lazily overhead. Bang! One of the pigeons exploded in a burst of feathers and plummeted out of the sky, landing on the sidewalk in front of the whole town. In shock, all of the townsfolk turned around to see the stone statue down on one knee with his musket on his shoulder. The statue looked down at all of them, surprised at the attention, then quickly got back to its feet and resumed its normal stance. Reports flooded all the local papers and news stations. The event was blamed on mass hysteria, a kind of group hallucination where everyone was somehow sharing the same story. But the number of people coming forward with the exact same account was irrefutable evidence. That's where the Foundation had to step in. In January 1996, containment procedures began, and the statue was given the designation SCP-011. Of course, a large contingent of agents suddenly appearing in a small town would raise a lot of suspicion, so the Foundation had to move very cautiously. One agent at a time, the Foundation established itself in Woodstock and began to study the statue day in and day out. By sitting on park benches, even looking through cutout holes in newspapers, and wearing fake outfits so as not to arouse suspicion. Steadily over time, the statue appeared to gain either a heightened mobility or just a renewed sense of confidence. While much of the time it did remain standing immobile, it would begin to occasionally stretch when it thought no one was looking and glance this way and that in apparent annoyance with the birds circling over its head. The shooting steadily grew more regular. Foundation agents observed several birds being picked out of the sky by the musket fire of SCP-011 over the following weeks. A clear pattern started to emerge. The statue would only fire at birds that seemed to be flying above it or getting too curious about it. In fact, the more fecal matter built up on the statue, the more aggressive it would be. Both in its body language and mood seemed to sour the dirtier it got. While there were initial concerns about the SCP potentially turning its rifle towards the local townspeople, these worries were largely dismissed as SCP-011 gradually started to build up a rapport with those around it. Before long, the caretakers of the park were having exchanges with the SCP, These exchanges started with the caretaker speaking directly to the SCP, and it nodding or subtly acknowledging the things they said. But over time, the interactions grew more and more personable. In the year 2000, SCP-011 spoke for the first time. It had just fired its rifle, picking off a pigeon from over 200 feet away, when a caretaker mildly exclaimed, "Nice shot!" The statue smiled, dipped his hat to the caretaker and said, "Thank you," in a gravelly voice. This marked a significant change in the Foundation's approach to the containment of SCP-011. Up until this point, the SCP was considered a broadly harmless member of the local town community. However, its ability to speak raised concerns as to this SCP's development. 4 years ago, it had been an immobile statue with nothing out of the ordinary to raise any suspicions among those around it. Where would its cognitive development end? Now that it had gained the ability to talk, groundskeepers and agents posing as groundskeepers struck up conversations with SCP-011 as often as possible. At first, these exchanges were brief, but over time, the SCP became steadily more vocal, until soon it was engaged in intellectual debates and sharing its views on the world with anyone who would listen. It was becoming clear that new containment measures were needed. In fact, SCP-011 soon lost interest in shooting birds. Or rather, the SCP was persuaded to stop shooting birds. While the prospect of having animals defecate on it still appeared to anger the statue, the Foundation was able to explain through ideological grounds why shooting birds was a disproportionate response relative to the minor harm they were doing to it. Keen to engage in philosophical and ethical discussions, the statue was very open to hearing the Foundation's viewpoint on the issue, and having sufficiently considered all sides of the debate, decided that it would, in fact, be better for the well-being of all involved if it stopped shooting the birds from the sky. In return, the caretakers and Foundation agents promised to do their best to clean it regularly and keep the animals at bay. But with word of this bizarre tourist attraction steadily gathering momentum as the age of email began to take off, the Foundation decided that it would be best to relocate SCP-011 entirely. However, agents who had been living in Woodstock for the prior 4 years were hesitant to relocate the entity to a test chamber or storage facility. The benefits that it had brought to the local community far outweighed the risks and threats that it posed. The statue had become a local celebrity, smiling and waving at children who went past, and even offering brief history lessons to any confused tourists who found themselves wandering through the park. Most just assumed it was a person in gray paint. It was Agent Khan who came up with the idea of relocating SCP-011 to a museum. Being kept indoors, away from the dangers of any fecal bombing runs, was the main priority. Khan argued that within a museum, the statue would blend in seamlessly with the exhibits around it. Furthermore, if anyone did see the statue move or talk, they would assume that it was an interactive exhibit and treated as such. Having shown a real love for academia, history, and debate, Khan believed that SCP-011 would benefit greatly from being in such a setting, both learning and eventually even teaching about the history of the American Civil War. However, when all these arguments were put forward to the statue itself, it was hesitant. Having spent the entirety of its cognitive existence standing on the same plinth, shooting at the same pigeons, the idea of relocating to somewhere new and unknown was very intimidating. Even with the soldier's mindset, SCP-011 was still feeling incredibly nervous about the idea of moving house. Agent Khan and SCP-011 found themselves locked in a stalemate. Try as she might, convincing the SCP to leave its current home was like talking to a brick wall, or rather, a stone wall. The pair of them ended up dropping the conversation for a couple years, focused instead on psychiatric evaluations and history lessons for the SCP. In 2002, the Foundation officially declared that SCP-011 had achieved sentience with a great enough level of self-awareness to pass as a normal human being, aside from the fact that it was composed entirely of stone. For 2 years, Agent Khan talked to SCP-011 every day on the park bench. The slats on the bench had to be replaced several times as the weight of the statue broke through them, snapping them clean in half on several occasions. During this period, the pair of them built up a rapport rarely seen between humans and SCPs. So much so that in 2004, Agent Khan managed to convince SCP-011 to move to a local museum on one condition: she would go as well. The Foundation agreed to the terms, deciding that Khan could take on the role of being a researcher in the museum. That way, she could keep an eye on SCP-011 and report any activities, while the Foundation officially relinquished control over the SCP. What happened next was perhaps rather predictable, or at least it would be predictable to anyone who had worked with Agent Khan and SCP-011 during that time in Vermont. As the pair of them moved into their new lives at the museum, romantic feelings blossomed between them. Seeing as SCP-011 is officially outside of the SCP Foundation's jurisdiction, there has been no official inquiry into the nature and practicalities of the relationship between the woman and the statue. But from the reports that make their way to the Foundation every 3 months, it is clear that both are very much enjoying the privacy of their new arrangement. Roger Pascal closed his eyes, imagining the barrel raising higher and higher until it was pointed squarely at his face. He had been told by his bosses not to ask questions about the origins of the statue that had suddenly appeared in the Civil War section. Even when he saw the statue's eyes moving, he'd kept his mouth shut. That was until he was doing his security rounds that night and heard those booming footsteps leading him behind one of the displays. He had rushed over in a panic. Peering around the corner, he had been shocked to see Miss Khan, one of the researchers here, and the Civil War statue engaged in a passionate kiss. He had turned and bolted as fast as he could until he ended up here, terrified on the floor as he imagined the musket being leveled at him. But then a second pair of footsteps joined the group, and a woman's laugh filled the room. Opening his eyes, the security guard saw the pair of them, the statue and the researcher standing in the doorway, laughing about the whole situation. The musket was slung over the man's shoulder as he offered a cold, stony hand down to the security guard to help him up. Ironically, there was something about the statue's smile that softened Roger's stony heart as he was hauled to his feet. I have so many questions.
Some say that SCP-2102 was a mistake, an abomination created by an accident of medical science. Maybe those people are right. Maybe there's much more to it than that. Either way, they don't know the full story. How could they? They weren't there. They weren't there all the way back in 1972. But Dr. Pavel Zukal was. The earliest moments, the events that directly preceded SCP-2102's creation began on March 2nd. The wind was carrying an unforgiving, freezing bite with it as Zukal made his way to the Institute of Experimental Medicine, ZISAV, in Czechoslovakia. With the Cold War between the USSR and the United States underway, there was already an air of secrecy on both sides. Espionage and intelligence-gathering operations were rampant, bringing with them paranoia and distrust. There was no way of knowing if someone was a double agent, leaking information to the West. But while the governments of Russia, America, and their various respective allies and enemies scrambled for control and amassed obscene quantities of nuclear arms in secret, there were even more cogs turning, hidden in the deepest, darkest shadows. The SCP Foundation's long-standing rivalry with various other groups of interest was well known among any with a high enough security clearance. Most of these groups were radicals or outliers, despite possessing knowledge of anomalies or even being directly linked to them. A lot of GOIs were independent of any world government. But for decades, the Foundation had been aware of a directly competing establishment, effectively a parallel of their own organization on the other side of the globe. They were known as GRU Division P, a USSR equivalent of the SCP Foundation themselves. It is unclear based on what was recovered from Dr. Zukal's personal diary if he had been directly scouted by GRU Division P for their project in Czechoslovakia. Given the air of secrecy engulfing the USSR at the time, it is possible that Pavel himself had no inclination that Division P was even involved in the project, due to take place at the Institute of Experimental Medicine. He might have suspected, but with no way of knowing for sure. Similarly, there was no way Zukal could have known where the project would lead, what he would have a hand in creating. The initial few weeks after his arrival at the Institute were rocky, to say the least. Zukal, along with a team of scientists and technicians working on orders direct from Moscow, had to contend with unreliable equipment and difficulty getting electricity to power the project. Eventually, after clearing those initial hurdles, testing could begin. But what was the goal of this mysterious project? Well, through Zukal, GRU Division P and the Kremlin were chasing something the scientific world has been trying to accomplish for decades. Something that could change the very landscape of not only the Cold War, but the entirety of modern medicine: the secrets of cellular regeneration. Unlocking that would, in theory, enable them to create the world's very first unkillable super soldier. And hey, it definitely wouldn't be the craziest secret operation carried out by a world superpower during the Cold War. The CIA spent millions turning a cat into a listening device and training it to infiltrate enemy headquarters. This so-called acoustic kitty was struck and killed by a random van during its first mission. Compared to that, a cell-regenerating super soldier was positively sensible. With a worldwide nuclear arms race already underway, perhaps the project's ultimate goal was to produce an entire army of these self-regenerating troops. With something like that in their hands, the USSR would have the manpower to reinforce their nuclear arsenal, and potentially even soldiers capable of surviving and healing from the effects of an atomic blast. On the 5th of May 1972, the first of the project's human test subjects began to show promising results. They underwent physical trauma at the hands of Zukal and the other scientists, only for their bodies to react much faster than the ordinary healing process would allow. Rapid clotting took place in the affected areas, preventing the subjects from bleeding out. However, this quickly went awry. The clots turned into severe lesions. Realizing this had occurred thanks to Macaulay, one of the other project scientists administering too much neodymium, Zukal chastised his colleague, vowing him to drag him to Moscow personally if another mistake like that ever took place again. Unfortunately, by the last few days of June, Dr. Zukal and his team were no closer to success. Every subject that underwent testing succumbed to the same necrosis. Reducing the amount of neodymium had only made the reaction worse, something Pavel couldn't allow Macaulay to know without the risk of it being held over his head for the remainder of the project. In every instance, the doctors were able to trigger rapid cell division, 50 times faster than that which occurs in the ordinary healing process of human beings. But the biggest drawback was that this division would quickly become uncontrollable. It was creating enough new matter on a cellular level that it would choke each test subject in its own excess waste. As you might expect, Dr. Zukal noted this in his diary that this process wasn't a pretty sight. Come mid-August 1972, the project scientists decided they needed a test subject with more resilience than the average person, and a suitable candidate was provided. He was a counter-revolutionary who had been sentenced to 15 years in a uranium mine as a punishment detail. Despite such an extended period of time under the harsh conditions of the mine and the close proximity to a radioactive element such as uranium, the man managed to survive unscathed. Upon closer examination, this new guinea pig, referred to as X16, had a rate of healing twice as fast as that of an average man. Perhaps it was a random genetic abnormality that made X16 this way, or maybe it was a result of his extensive time in the uranium mines. Either way, it made him the perfect new subject for Zukal's experiments. Initially, Subject X16's preliminary testing results looked promising. The wound healing process was actually taking place now, instead of resulting in necrosis or aborting it as it had with the earlier experiments. In fact, Dr. Zukal seemed to think X16 was healing almost too quickly. But nevertheless, testing continued, although not without a different type of problem. The questionable morality of what they were doing began to set in for Pavel, causing him nights of endless tossing and turning, unable to sleep as he reflected on what he'd done. X16 had managed to survive for much longer than the earlier test subjects, but it was clear that the torture this man had to endure was exacting a heavy toll. Every day, the doctors would lacerate him, time and time again, recording the results. And every day, he survived, only for the cycle to begin again the next day. For his own part, Zukal was conflicted. On the one hand, the results of the testing were proving successful, lasting far longer and working far more effectively than they had in the past, and yet on the other, it came at the cost of one man's continued suffering. To make matters worse, Pavel had no way of voicing his concerns to any of his team. Any questioning of his orders or the project's methods would have been viewed by GRU Division P and the KGB as sedition and treason, earning the good doctor a one-way ticket to a gulag, or, if he was lucky, a clean shot to the back of the head from an agent's pistol. Often morality is sacrificed for the greater good, in the pursuit of the advancement of science or a nation's goals. But now that the project was showing results with X-16, now that it was real, what they were doing still weighed heavily on Dr. Zucal's conscience. Then, on October 15, 1972, the final piece of the puzzle seemed to become clear. By introducing the correct amount of stabilizing agent into the serum they had concocted, Zucal and his team had perfected the composition. Upon administering this newly completed version of the solution, the doctor noted in his diary that subject X-16 was responding well. At least, medically, the subject was responding well. It was clear that the continuous experimentation he had been subjected to was causing uncooperative behavior in X-16. But so close to the cusp of achieving the project's goals, Dr. Zucal was quick to cast aside his previous doubts about the ethics of their methods. They were so close to victory, so close to the project being over, that it no longer mattered how cooperative X-16 was being. But 2 weeks and 4 days later, just as the project was nearing its end goal, disaster struck. MU Dr. Elena Orakova was one of the scientists on Zucal's team, who had primarily helped when examining the early cell divisions, those that were leading to necrosis and causing test subjects to produce too much excessive genetic material. Elena had made a startling discovery and immediately brought it to Dr. Zucal in a distraught show of panic. The cell samples they had used to test their serum were now gaining mass, seemingly from nowhere. Just like the earlier experiments, the effects were working almost too well, causing an overabundance of cellular regeneration to the point where the cells couldn't stop producing masses of waste genetic material. When Zucal brought Elena's findings to Drs. Sislard and one Georgi T. Fedinko, the project heads assigned by Division P, they were quick to disregard it as an error, determining to press on with the project to meet their deadline. Over the course of the following weeks, up to late November, Zucal was trying to determine what was causing this change. It was clear that unless he and Elena could resolve the issues with the serum, subject X-16 would be a total failure. But time was running out, with their superiors at GRU Division P and the Kremlin expecting results by early December. Under untold amounts of pressure and subsequent stress, Dr. Pavel Zucal found himself losing time, unable to sleep to the point where he was drifting off whenever he was on the verge of a breakthrough. By the end, Elena was the only member of the team trying to help him methodically figure out what had gone wrong. The deadline for the project arrived on December 2nd, 1972. Pavel didn't sleep all night leading up to it, knowing he would have to present a functioning super soldier to GRU Division P. In the best case, he was risking being accused of negligent failure, forced to restart the project from scratch, making his months of hard work redundant. But worst case scenario, Zucal could be charged with treason for having not completed the task he was selected for. On the 2nd of December, he wrote, "I really don't know which is better. Tomorrow is a day too." Nobody knows if Dr. Pavel Zucal lived to see that tomorrow. His final diary entry was made on the day SCP-2102 was born. For months, the SCP Foundation had operatives embedded within the Czechoslovakian government as part of innumerable Cold War espionage gathering efforts. During that time, their agents had gathered enough intelligence to make the Foundation aware of a GRU Division P project based at the Institute of Experimental Medicine, and that the scientists there were looking to unlock the secret of rapid cellular regeneration. Someone, possibly even one of Zucal's team, had managed to infiltrate the project and had leaked documents to the SCP Foundation, explaining what was going on in Czechoslovakia. The plan was that the Foundation would move in secret of course, to extract and contain test subject X-16 in January of 1973. That day would never come to fruition though. On the 2nd of December, only a month before they had planned to act, the Foundation became aware of a catastrophe occurring at the Institute of Experimental Medicine. One of their agents in Czechoslovakia alerted them to a disturbance that had caused civilians and scientists alike to run from the institute in fear for their lives. Something had gotten loose, and the Foundation had to act fast. Luckily, a reconnaissance team was stationed in Eastern Europe. Members of various mobile task forces who had been spying on GRU Division P and the rest of the USSR. Moving quickly, the recon team was deployed to Czechoslovakia. Led by a field commander named Merrick, they were given the objective to determine the cause of the situation and, if possible, recover its anomalous source. Merrick and the recon team arrived on site at the Institute's grounds. The entrance to the bunker which had been housing the project was left wide open, with not a soul in sight. As the team progressed further, Merrick couldn't help but notice a pungent smell permeating the labs and offices that they passed. Foundation Command urged their operatives to proceed cautiously and recover any paperwork they could. Among the logistical documents was a diary belonging to one of the scientists, although the name Pavel Zukal on the cover was no longer legible, forever lost. The further he and the other MTF agents progressed, the worse the smell got. They located an elevator, deciding to take it down to the lower levels of the bunker. One by one, the team filed in, Merrick radioing command. "Command, any seismic activity in the area?" he asked. Not that we know of, Merrick," came the Foundation's reply. "Why?" I think I just felt something move down there." The elevator had barely descended a foot before it hit something, stopping in an instant. As Merrick tried once again to contact Foundation Command, that same something came tearing through the elevator floor. Over the radio, the SCP Foundation were treated to a cacophony of screeching, tearing metal, along with the screams of their own men. What Merrick and his team had encountered may have once been a man, perhaps someone subjected to cruelty and torture, but now all they saw was an amorphous, fleshy mass. Immediately, the recon team opened fire, engaging what they assumed was a raging monster. It probably never occurred to them that they might have just wanted to be free after years of imprisonment, followed by months of horrendous experiments. Minutes later, Merrick was able to get in contact with Command again, locked in a heated battle with the entity. But every round fired, every shot their guns landed, nothing was having any effect. Whenever Merrick dealt damage to the creature, part of it seemed to grow, faster and faster each time. Their guns were useless, unable to stop the expanding monstrous test subject. Even grenades thrown by the MTF operatives, causing multiple explosions, did little to stop the entity in its tracks. Listening in over the radio, knowing they had few options left, the SCP Foundation dispatched a pair of F-4 Phantoms, long-range supersonic fighter jets, equipped with a payload of M47A1 napalm incendiary bombs. With Merrick and his men almost on the ropes, Command issued an order to retreat. They fled the bunker, only to feel the ground shake beneath their feet. The monster had breached the topsoil, still coming after them. Jones, one of the Foundation's agents, was pulled under the encroaching shapeless mass, crushed to death as it continued its pursuit. Utterly horrified at the sight and speed of the creature, Merrick started begging Command over the radio to get its fighter jets to the scene. 6 minutes later, the sound of twin turbine engines shot through the air, followed by the whistle of bombs careening down towards the ground. In a second, Merrick, his team, and the creature were engulfed in a fiery explosion, the heat proving enough to cauterize the fleshy abomination's expanding tissue. Ever since December 1972, the entity now designated as SCP-2102 has been housed at Site-122, contained by the SCP Foundation. They keep it in a modified cell, restrained at all times with its hands and feet in padded sleeves. This is done in order to prevent the risk of injury, either accidental or intentional, given both SCP-2102's anomalous properties and its self-destructive tendencies. Its body is covered in scars, both from its previous escape attempts, back when it was known as Subject X-16, and from burns from the F-4 Phantom's napalm payload. These particular injuries seared the entity's ears, mouth, and eyes closed, rendering it deaf, mute, and blind. If SCP-2102 ever suffers any form of external injury, its anomalous properties will trigger. The creature, as you might have guessed, possessed an advanced form of cellular healing, able to regenerate from all wounds inflicted on it. However, the process was never perfected. It still works too well. So well that SCP-2102's cells don't know when to stop. Instead, they continue producing bodily tissue, expanding its mass into every available space without a halt. The process can be slowed if an obstacle is introduced, boxing in the exponentially growing tissue. However, any object or person in its path is eventually crushed under the mounting pressure. At present, the Foundation still has no idea how much SCP-2102's tissue could expand, potentially even posing a risk to the entire world if left unchecked. There is only one surefire way to stop the creature's healing. It can only be halted by cauterizing the open wound with intense heat. It's literally a surefire solution. SCP-2102 is a result of the good Dr. Zukal's work, combined with his and GRU Division P's willingness to put aside their morality. They didn't create an undying, regenerating super soldier for the USSR as they had intended. Instead, all they accomplished was turning a tortured man into a monster, an abomination endlessly tormented by the experiments performed on him. Not quite as useful on the battlefield, is it? Cast your mind back to the height of the Cold War. The ever-accelerating nuclear arms race brought us closer than ever before to making the nightmare of nuclear Armageddon a terrifying reality. The two main parties in this conflict are the United States and Soviet Union, each amassing huge amounts of nuclear warheads and jumping on any available advantage they can over their enemies. What you may not know is that in order to detect an impending attack from the United States, the Soviets developed what would become known to the West as the Dead Hand. But this experimental piece of technology also had another name, SCP-1984. It is no secret that the Soviet Union feared the threat of US nuclear strikes and invasion just as much as the US feared an attack from them. So SCP-1984 was created to act as a deterrence mechanism, specifically against secure second strikes. Secure second strikes were both a deterrent and overwhelming concern during the Cold War, referring to a country's ability after suffering an initial nuclear attack to still retaliate, firing on their enemy and causing untold damage with their own arsenal of nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union knew that any action they made that could be perceived as an attack on United States soil would be threatened with nuclear retaliation, and that if they fired first, America would return fire and potentially annihilate them with a second strike. SCP-1984 was to be an automated system that would activate in response to the destruction of the Soviets' main command and control structure. Given that the Dead Hand was created during the 80s, you might be forgiven for expecting a nuclear detection system built at this point in history to consist of various sensors connected to a computer network. But you have also probably already realized that if this was the case, then the Foundation wouldn't be so interested in it. In actuality, SCP-1984 is a fully autonomous entity rather than a network of sensors for detecting incoming nuclear strikes, or a computer capable of initiating a second strike. Perhaps what makes the Foundation more interested in the Dead Hand is that it is both self-aware and links simultaneously to every single one of Russia's nuclear launch sites. Not only this, but SCP-1984 also has direct access to every single one of the atomic weapons stockpiled by the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and is capable of launching intercontinental ballistic missiles at a moment's notice. In short, SCP-1984 could very easily and horrifyingly quickly trigger an all-out nuclear war, resulting in the extinction of all life on Earth. No wonder the Foundation considers the Dead Hand such a massive threat. SCP-1984 itself actually consists of the preserved remains of a Russian soldier by the name of Sergeant Marat Chernikov, who was killed during the Soviet-Afghan War in 1982. Most of the official documentation of Chernikov's existence has been expunged by the Russian Federation, and he is only referred to in fragmented documents recovered by the Foundation that refer to a Project December. These remains serve as the location of a semi-sentient consciousness that has been classified as SCP-1984-01. When it remains dormant and is not interfered with, SCP-1984-01 has the ability to receive and process any signal broadcast to it, and is able to decipher information combined in any signal it picks up. However, when global military tensions start to climb, especially when those tensions affect the Russian Federation, or what were once the satellite states of the former Soviet Union, the entity begins to manifest itself in the physical world, and usually in various strange and different ways. SCP-1984-01 has been known to appear in the real world in forms such as a humanoid outline, or a bright red specter taking the shape of a child with its legs cut off. Regardless of which shape it appears in, it is when the Dead Hand manifests in a more physical form that the wider scope of its abilities become clear. As mentioned previously, it can influence and even launch nuclear weapons, overriding their command systems and bypassing launch sequences. After appearing fully, SCP-1984-01 will travel at speeds of up to 140 kilometers an hour, directly to the nearest military installation capable of launching intercontinental ballistic missiles. Once it reaches its destination, SCP-1984-01 will immediately attempt to override the necessary systems to initiate a launch. After firing missiles at their predetermined targets, SCP-1984-01 will hastily travel to another facility housing nuclear ordnance, repeating the process until it has successfully launched all of Russia's atomic weapons. When engaged, the physical manifestation of SCP-1984 is highly aggressive and will lethally defend itself against anyone that it observes trying to interfere with it or stop it from causing a nuclear launch. The entity has displayed the ability to disrupt the nervous system, causing excruciating pain and debilitating damage to human beings. Its only known weakness, if any, is a susceptibility to microwave radiation. Although exposure to this does not seem to cause any lasting damage to SCP-1984, instead only temporarily disorienting its physical form. As for the origins of SCP-1984, the Soviet Union's official liaison with the SCP Foundation offered some clarity on this. Ironically, during early 1984, the liaison, a doctor named Sergei, described information regarding the Dead Hand as being of grave importance to the continued survival of the human race. Seeing as he was referring to an enemy that could single-handedly launch the Soviet Union's entire nuclear arsenal, he certainly had a point. A top-secret conference was held in Sarajevo between the Foundation's O5 Council and officials from both the USSR and the United States, using the 1984 Winter Olympics as cover, avoiding too many questions about several nations' high-ranking state officials being in the same place at once. The O5 Council was then given full, in-depth information about the Dead Hand, something they had previously assumed was a more conventional form of nuclear deterrence. SCP-1984 was far more, and worse, far out of the control of the Russian government. It was revealed that the entity had been designated outside the original specifications given to those who developed it. Initially, the Soviets had intended for the Dead Hand to be solely used as a secure second strike response. If the leaders of the Soviet Union were killed, SCP-1984 would react in kind to Russia's enemies, launching back all of the USSR's nuclear missiles in retaliation. This is more likely where the Dead Hand nickname comes from, hearkening to the idea of a dead man's switch. Picture that you had been mortally wounded by your worst enemy, shot in the stomach and laying on the ground, rapidly bleeding out. You know that there is no chance you will survive, but you cannot afford to let your enemy get away. What they don't know is that you rigged the entire building around you both with explosives. With your dying breath, you activate the detonator, assuring your own and your enemy's mutual destruction. Kaboom. Then curtains for both of you. The pressing issue, and the reason this secret summit between the USSR, USA, and SCP Foundation was held, was that SCP-1984 was no longer interested in just waiting for Russia to be attacked and only reacting after the fact. Instead, the entity's physical form was trying to preemptively strike at the enemies of the motherland, attempting to activate nuclear launches and send atomic weapons to destroy the United States, France, West Germany, and the People's Republic of China. In other words, the Dead Hand was eager to get a head start at causing total nuclear annihilation, not to mention potentially killing millions and reducing target countries to little more than irradiated craters, awash with deadly nuclear fallout. Both the Soviet Union and the United States begged the SCP Foundation to intervene and contain SCP-1984, and under the direction of the O5 Council, they stepped in to take direct control of the situation, establishing new containment procedures in the hopes of keeping SCP-1984 from hitting as many launch buttons as it could find. The embalmed remains that seemed to create the manifestations of the Dead Hand entity were held securely in an armed containment complex near Verkhoyansk, part of the Sakha Republic within the Russian Federation. SCP-1984 was placed within a standard humanoid containment cell, which was itself held within a Faraday cage, a type of enclosure constructed with or covered in conductive material designed to block electromagnetic fields. This was done to block any external broadcast signals from reaching SCP-1984, and thus causing it to manifest its other form if it learned of an impending attack on Russia, even a fictional one, perhaps as a part of a television broadcast. As part of the Dead Hand's containment, all signals broadcast near its cage are to be monitored, and only broadcasts featuring doctored information would reach the entity. Thankfully to the work of the SCP Foundation's Information Control Team, SCP-1984 is drip-fed a stream of carefully fabricated information. Using on-site equipment and facilities, a team of military historians, economists, actors, and Soviet media specialists, the Information Control Team have created an ongoing narrative wherein the Cold War never ended. Through falsified radio and television broadcasts made to look like era-appropriated news organizations, they managed to keep SCP-1984 convinced that the nuclear stalemate between the Soviet Union and United States is still ongoing. Unfortunately, sometimes information from the real world is able to bleed through. An incident involving SCP-1984 occurred on August 8, 1984, and almost brought forth a full-scale nuclear war. While preparing for a campaign speech, the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, uttered the following joke.
I am pleased to tell you today that I've signed legislation that will outlaw Russia forever. We begin bombing in 5 minutes.
Naturally, thousands of media outlets reported on this, but signals of those broadcasts, including recordings of the president's remark, made their way to SCP-1984. Foundation researchers were both unsure of how these transmissions breached the Faraday cage surrounding the dead hand, and were unable to prevent what happened next. Hearing what it could only assume was a genuine declaration of war, the manifestation of the SCP-1984-01 entity happened immediately after Reagan's words reached its containment cell. This time, the entity appeared as a semi-transparent woman, withered and blue, wearing traditional Pashtun dress. Armed personnel guarding SCP-1984's cage engaged the entity, causing it to retaliate, lashing out and attacking any that stood in its way. One captain and 2 privates that suffered the brunt of SCP-1984's offensive capabilities began bleeding heavily from their ears, seizing violently. Most gruesomely of all, a liquid leaked from their eyes and nose believed to have been cerebrospinal fluid. While armed personnel attempted to use microwave-emitting weaponry to slow the entity down, the Information Control Team was frantically trying to record a new falsified broadcast, in the hopes that SCP-1984 would cease its hostilities and the entity would dissipate before it was able to travel at high speed to any nearby Soviet nuclear facilities and begin bombarding the United States. Their first attempt to record a new broadcast that would result in a cessation of SCP-1984's slaughter of its guards was interrupted when a nearby wall collapsed. Desperate to recontain the creature, the Information Control Team tried to film the broadcast a second time and succeeded, although one of the actors portraying a newsreader suffered a stroke and had to be edited out to convince the dead hand of its supposed authenticity. What followed was a short news clip clarifying that Russia's Politburo was in on President Reagan's joke, including old footage of the USSR's General Secretary Konstantin Chernenko, confirming that the Soviet Union's nuclear forces were not on high alert. Miraculously, after 15 more minutes of sustained fighting with guards, SCP-1984's physical manifestation began to disappear, gradually dematerializing while it seemed to attack with far less intensity. Eventually, containment was reestablished, at the cost of the deaths of 17 members of Foundation staff, both guards and researchers. A further 8, however, suffered traumatic brain injuries that left them all permanently disabled. The one upside is that this incident remains the only time SCP-1984 has ever breached its containment and caused harm to others. And considering that it could very well have launched Russia's nuclear arsenal, the casualties could easily have been much higher. So remember, folks, don't joke about nuclear weapons, especially if you're the president. You never know what anomalies lurking in the bodies of dead Russian soldiers might be listening, and if they are, you'd better hope they have a sense of humor. Now check out SCP-001 The Scarlet King and SCP-2935 O Death for more anomalies that could destroy the world.